Good afternoon, members, and welcome to this Overview and Scrutiny Board meeting of BCP Council. Can I just offer a very warm welcome to any members of the public or the press that may be watching on the live stream this afternoon. Nice to have you with us. So, members, without further ado, I'll just ask Jill Hollyoak from Democratic Services if she would kindly read out some housekeeping notes on how this meeting will be conducted this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Please note that this meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Board is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the Council website for a minimum of 6 months. Please could everyone present follow the usual ground rules which have been established for these meetings. And please could everyone ensure background noise is kept to a minimum and mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. Jill, agenda item 1, apologies. Do we have any apologies?
We do, Chairman. We have apologies from Councillor Tony O'Neill, Councillor Dwayne Farr, Councillor Jude Butt, Councillor Mark Howell and Councillor Lewis Allison, and also from Chief Executive Graham Farrant. And substitute member, Councillor Derek Borthwick is here for Councillor Farr, Councillor May Haynes is here for Councillor Butt, Councillor Andy Hadley is here for Councillor Howell, and Councillor Robert Lawton is here for Councillor O'Neill.
Thank you. Thank you, Jill. Agenda item 3, declarations of interest. Do any councillors have any disclosable pecuniary interest or any other interest on any items on the agenda? Councillor Hayes?
Thank you, Chairman. It's more a personal interest in item 6, which is the CSP paper, because I was actually part and parcel of the CSP, which is actually detailed in the paper. I think it's appropriate that I leave the room for that item. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Haynes. Agenda item, there be no others. Agenda item 4, the board are asked to approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of November 2021. Do I have any comments on those meeting minutes, please? No, I don't see anywhere. Okay, well, taking those as agreed. And the action sheet that goes with them, there's very little on that actually at the moment. So any comments? No, thank you. So public issues, agenda item. I'm just going to address that now. And I know we do have a couple of residents here this afternoon that will be making statements. So we'll ask you to do that when we get to agenda item 8, gentlemen, if that's okay. Sorry.
Sorry, Chairman, just to interrupt. I think the gentlemen are just observing, and I think their statements are being read out on their behalf.
Oh. Okay, thank you. Apparently your statements are going to be read out on your behalf. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, public issues. With respect to agenda item 8, the call-in cabinet member decision, ETRO Tatnam Road, we have received a number of public statements. In fact, we've received 12 public statements submitted in accordance with the Constitution, and they were received by the deadline. These have been circulated to all members of the board. Now, yeah, we'll be taking those at the agenda item 8 when we get to it. In addition to those statements, we have received quite a number of written representations, quite a few over the weekend, and then again this morning, a significant number of representations. And what we will do with those is they have been circulated for members to read, but I have to confess that I have not been able to read some of them that was received very shortly before this meeting. In fact, we had about 80 representations. So, you know, it will not be possible for members of the board to have read all of those. But when we come on to the debate, I think we'll see the relevance of those representations. But we're they've been available for people to read and have had time to do it. I'm sure they will have done it. I certainly did as many as I received over the weekend, and certainly taken those into account. So with that, we'll go on to agenda item 6, which is the crime and disorder scrutiny. And we're going to consider a paper on the community safety partnership. So for those, okay, thank you, Councillor Haynes. Councillor Haynes is now going to leave the meeting. I'd like to welcome our visitors on this afternoon, in particular Chief Superintendent Mark Callahan from the Dorset Police. We have a number of officers here. In particular, we have Kelly Ansell, who will be giving a short introduction in a moment, and also Andrew Williams, the Head of Safer Communities. But before I come to them, I'd just like to call on the portfolio holder for this item, Councillor Bobby Dubb, if she would just kindly introduce her team and maybe a short introduction to the paper. So, good afternoon, Councillor Dubb. Nice to see you. Over to you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for inviting me and allowing me to speak today. I very much appreciate it. The paper today is our Community Safety Partnership paper, which is required to come to a scrutiny body just to see how we're doing in terms of the work that's been delivered and the programme board, and that's moving ahead and going forward for the next year. It's an extremely exciting time, and I'd like to thank the previous portfolio holder for all of her work that she has done to bring us to this moment. There's an assessment going on so that we can start to deliver and organise our priorities for 2022 moving forward. And I'm really looking forward to seeing some of the really good work that has been carried out over the past year to be continued, and also and how we're going to further engage with our members and with our partners as we move this forward. So to assist us today, as Chair, you've already said, we've got our interim Chief Operations Officer, Ms Kelly Ansell, and also Chief Superintendent, Mr Mark Callahan, and also I believe it's Alva Bailey, our BCP Community Scrutiny Strategic Development Lead Officer as well. Chair, I appreciate you're really pushed for time, and I could talk to this paper for quite a long time. I'm that passionate about it. But if it's okay, would it be possible to pass over to officers so that they can introduce the paper with their presentation, please?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Councillor Dubb. Kelly Ansell, thank you.
Thank you. I'm hoping that my screen is now being shared, and that you can see that. So we've just prepared a very short introductory presentation. I will hand over to Mark Callahan as the chair of the CSP in a moment. But I just wanted to. Bobby's covered. Councillor Dove has already covered a lot of the purpose of the paper. But just to point out to the panel that the Local Government Act requires crime and disorder scrutiny as one of the functions the council must ensure its scrutiny arrangements cover. So that's what we're here to do today. Myself, Mark Callahan, and both Councillor Dove and Alva Bailey as our strategic development lead are here to support that. I think Andrew Williams, as the Head of Safer Communities, is also here. So lots of support for any questions and debate that might come up. But just to cover off, in terms of that really important role of the scrutiny panel, the role is one of critical friend, providing constructive challenge at a strategic level. The focus should be on the entire partnership. We all have our own responsibilities as different public agencies around community safety. The purpose of this paper is to consider how the value that's presented by coming together as a partnership to deal with those issues. And so if there are any issues that arise that relate to a particular agency, it could be that it's more appropriate to refer that to the governing bodies of those agencies themselves. And then finally, just to mention that obviously, as I say, we've got plenty of time for well, I hope we've got plenty of time for questions. I know that we are pushed today, but just to say that really reflective of what Councillor Dove has already mentioned. This is a partnership that's very much on a journey, and I hope that the report really sets that out clearly in terms of the fact that we've recognised the challenges and the scale of the challenges around crime and disorder for BCP, and the need for our partnership to be very much fit for purpose in that regard. And that's been a huge focus for us, and a lot of work that you can hopefully see celebrated in the report, but also setting out a journey and a path still to tread. So I will hand you over to Chief Superintendent Mark Callaghan as the chair of the CSP, just to finish off some introductory comments, if that's okay. Over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Kelly. If you can move to the next slide, that'd be really good. Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So I obviously chair the executive CSP group for BCP, but I'm also the local policing area commander for Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole as well, from a policing perspective. And Kelly's already alluded there to the journey that we've been on, and it is still a journey, but I think it's a journey that's made significant progress, and actually in a real difficult time of COVID as well, which has impacted on us all in many different ways. So if you look very briefly at 2019, the new CSP was established for BCP. Every year there's a strategic assessment, so understanding what the threats in our communities are and our priorities are, but that strategic assessment was completed 2019 with clear priorities being set, which we'll come on to in a second in terms of what progress has been made with those. And obviously as we go into 2020, we have COVID. COVID for everybody was impacted, but I have to say the relationships and the partnership response for COVID as a result of already really strong partnership relations made the process much easier, and we was able to step up to the challenge and deliver for our communities. So that COVID response and then the resource challenges really did focus our mind and make sure we gave a really good tactical response. But importantly, we was agile and we learned quickly. And if things weren't happening, we had the ability to change things from a CSP perspective and respond quickly and to make sure it was delivering for our communities. And then we go into 2021, post-COVID. Well, arguably we're not in post-COVID, we're in COVID still. But actually throughout 19, 20, 21, the journey, whilst we've been maintaining the operational business for our communities as a partnership, we've also been progressing really hard. And Alva's on the call today, and Kelly do some really good work in the background, making sure that we're progressive and not stagnating. And obviously, I'll go on in a second and talk some of the priorities. But if you look at the challenge, the review, the reflect, the redesign, and the refocus of the CSP, if we have more time today, we could, and I will allude to it in a moment. But we have the ability now that we've got an environment. We challenge each other as partners. We're coordinated, and through that review and reflection process, we've redesigned the CSP so we have an executive group. And then each of the priority areas sitting underneath it has a strategic and tactical work pillar. The idea being, though, is that we have a CSP that's got teeth. We're delivering. We're really listening to our communities, looking at the problems that we've got to be able to, in a multi-agency partnership approach, making sure that we're able to really deliver and drive improvement forwards for our communities. It's not easy. There's a lot of hard work going into it, and it's very challenging. But you've only got to look at, of the report, pages 3, 4, and 5 and into 6, and give some of that real tactical detail of what has been, what success has taken place over the last, 12, 18 months, really. And that takes us into a new ways of working in terms of how we respond to the COVID side of the business, which today doesn't see us all in a room, sees many of us on screens, etc. Can we move to the next slide, please? So if we look at the 2021 priorities, and again, I'm not going to go into the detail. I'm going to keep this quite high level because the paper's there for the detail, and we can do some questions and answers. But just because these are flagged as the priorities here, it doesn't mean other things aren't happening. It's just as a multi-agency approach, looking at our communities, looking at the issues in our communities, we have really picked out the key priorities. And again, we're in this process where we constantly review this. So domestic abuse, significant levels of domestic abuse in the BCP area, and there's huge amounts of work that you'll see in the report, and huge progress. And this is one of the most mature groups I think, led by Kelly, throughout, really has got some teeth and drive. We've got good perpetrator programs as an example. Sexual violence and linked to public place violence in the different areas of the business. What I want to just touch on here really is just that the violence against women, girls and men, but in particular the Sarah Everard work and how together as a partnership we've really started to pull together around these areas around violence against women and girls and sexual violence, but also making sure that we have a service, a multi-agency service that responds to all gender, not just single genders. I think without going into all the different areas, we know, some may say drugs isn't on there, but actually county lines, is that linked to drugs? Drugs, alcohol, mental health, a toxic trio are all part of domestic abuse, sexual violence, public place, alcohol-related violence, the child exploitation amongst our children, etc. So it's very much one of the causal effects of the problems that we have within our communities. So I think what's a real strength of the CSP and all our partnerships is how, one, we're focused on enforcement. So it's not all about, we talk about teeth and driving, whilst prevention is really important. I'll come on to that in a second in terms of our approach to prevention and the link to our police and crime plan, the link to the issues in our communities. Enforcement is a really important part of what we do, and with the antisocial behaviour team and policing and wider partners, we are making sure that we enforce where appropriate as well. That ambition to make Dorset a toxic place for criminals like county lines, no-one-knows, etc. But I think one of the most important things, and one of the real, as we step forward into the future, one of the most important areas that is really important that we grip hold of and we drive forwards is the public health approach to our problems. And that's about understanding the cause of the cause and not just simply treating the symptoms. And as a partnership going forwards, whilst we'll still continue to treat the symptoms, we are committed to understand the causes of the issues in our communities, whether that be through poverty, through deprivation, inequality, transient criminals coming into the county, etc., or the fact that there's no services available for certain areas of linked to youth antisocial behaviour. What we are really committed to is understanding those causes and taking the public health approach to the problems. So actually we start to reduce harm and reduce demand, but we actually tackle the problems, not just the symptoms. And of course, just finally, I pause to just comment on the two recommendations and then obviously any questions and answers. What's really important with the CSP, and see it ever more now, to give reassurance to members that we're also linked into the wider work of the council, the cleaner, greener, safer work, the vibrant communities work. So the CSP isn't working in the silo, it's working hand in hand with other areas of our businesses as a multi-agency approach with partners to make sure that we continue to deliver together in a coordinated way as a whole system. And Chair, before I pause, I suppose it's just there's just really point toward, which I'm sure you'll come on to in a second, just within the paper on page 2, there's a couple of recommendations which I just draw your attention to as Chair towards the end of our session. But hopefully that's given a very quick, I'm conscious of time, quick strategic run through of some of the issues that complement the paper, but I know we're all available to take questions, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mark. Okay, members, I hope we've all read the paper, which is a fairly detailed paper on this. Councillor Slade.
Only if nobody else wants to go first. I didn't see anyone else's hands.
I've got a couple.
Do you want? Why don't you go first?
I'm just going to kick off. Just to look at the overview of why we have a CSP, and I understand it says in the report there is legislation that's set down. My question is, who has the overall responsibility for making sure the legislation is enacted? And I'm assuming it's BCP Council who are required to establish the safety partnership. Although I did notice in the report it talks about one of the police acts. So I don't know if can somebody just answer that very basic question, who is responsible overall for setting up the BCP CSP, and then for making sure it's working. I know that the responsibility of overview and scrutiny is to scrutinise it, so I want to understand exactly who's responsible for it. Can you answer that, Kelly?
Yeah, I can happily answer that, Councillor Bartlett. Essentially, the council tends to take is the sort of lead partner in facilitating the community safety partnership, but there are a number of different responsible authorities who have a statutory requirement in terms of really meeting those objectives that you've outlined. So the council obviously being one, Dorset Police being another, Dorset and Wiltshire Fire and Rescue Service, the National Probation Service, and then the Dorset CCG. So they're all the responsible authorities, but the Community Safety Partnership, whilst that's our sort of, they are our executive partners, we do have a number of different additional partners on the board to really add strength. So, for example, we have a voluntary and community sector representative, someone to represent housing. There are a number of different partners who kind of bring that into a full partnership.
Okay, I think I understand the relationship of the partners who do have statutory responsibilities to contribute to the CSP. I just wanted to establish it is the BCP Council's statutory responsibility to create the BSP and take the CSP and be responsible for it. Is that right?
It's a statutory responsibility, and we obviously report ultimately to the Home Office in that regard.
Okay, and our portfolio holder is one that has overall responsibility for this area. Yeah.
For this area, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much. Just wanted to clear that up. Thank you. So, Councillor Slade.
Thanks for lining that up beautifully. Because I've got a number of questions, and they're probably to different people. So feel free to take them, whoever wants. There's a couple of things that I'm frustrated by with this, because I think we've been waiting for this paper for a little while. I think we were supposed to have it in the summer, and it's been put off. And I suppose I'm a bit disappointed because it feels quite narrow. I thought we were going to be getting a crime and disorder strategy, which in my world goes way beyond the things that the CSP does, because the CSP is very focused around particular types of crime and particular parts of the community. And there's very little in there about the broader impact that crime and disorder has on the lives of all of us. I just wondered whether I know you've got to have some priorities, but there's very little about acquisitive crime, about vehicle crime, about burglaries, about fraud, cybercrime, all the things that I know certainly in parts of Poole, we don't tend to be, we don't suffer with a lot of those town centre issues, but we do suffer with a lot of people being very frightened in their lives, and this doesn't really touch any of those areas, which is a shame. So I'm interested to understand, does the crime and disorder strategy go beyond the CSP, or does it only focus on those more narrow and pretty awful things? I'm not taking away from the fact those are really awful areas. But it does feel quite town centre orientated. The other thing I'm confused about is who's on it, because it says in the paper that there's opposition representation, and I'm not aware of who that might be. And we sent a shadow portfolio team to Democratic Services at the beginning of this year, and certainly none of them have ever been asked to attend. There doesn't appear to be any involvement of youth services. And I wonder whether there's any involvement, bearing in mind this is Home Office, about justice, because a lot of the issues that you see is because the options available for some of the crimes that are being committed aren't actually stopping the reoffending or putting people off. And I'm just wondering whether there's any role for the justice service beyond probation within the CSP. And the other issue that I have is, I know you've had a change of police and crime commissioner this year, and it says in the paper that the Police and Crime Commissioner has a set of priorities, the CSP has a set of priorities. They aren't necessarily the same, but they do need to take account of each other. I wonder whether there have been any changes as a result of that change of PCC. And I also was wondering if in the future there was any possibility of some slightly more meaningful KPIs, because there's a great list of successes at the end, but I don't know whether they're successes relative to anything, or whether they're just a list of numbers. You know, are we improving? Are we getting worse? Is, you know, is things changing? And I'd hope that in the same way as we asked for the domestic violence strategy to go back and come back more thorough, whether the next iteration of this next year might have a little bit more around the journey in terms of success rather than the journey in terms of how the structure is set up. Does that make sense? Thank you.
Is that one for you, Kelly, please?
I think Mark's going to come in, and then I might come in on the end of that, if that's okay.
Okay, yes,
I'll come in and let you mop up. Thank you, Councillor Slade, as always, for comprehensive questions. I'm gonna, in the time I've got, I'll try and give this as much. There's a lot of questions there, so I'll try and reply as much as I can, and if not, we can pick up offline around some things. So crime and disorder aspects of things. I think what's really key is that the CSP is about identifying what the key priorities impacting on our communities. There is underneath this, there's more documents. So the strategic assessment I refer to, that I can reassure you does refer to those other crimes that you're referring to. And actually we use something called the MORILE. So we use it in policing and also in partnership. It's the management of risk in law enforcement, but also there's a partnership side of that. And so in making our strategic assessment and looking at the crimes and disorders that the CSP should focus on as priorities, we take into consideration the strategic views of all the organisations, the MORILE scoring, which is I won't go into the detail, but it looks at the biggest community impacts. And also it links to things like our PCGs, our coordination groups, to understand that soft narrative, as well as information from local councillors, members, etc., about their communities. So there's a much richer document around that, and this is a very strategic update around what those key priorities are. Not every area can be managed in the CSP, and some of them are single agency or just two agency approaches. So actually, if you look at some of the acquisitive crime, arguably you'd have this year, if it wasn't a 12-month and we was spontaneous in our nature, catalytic converter thefts were probably one of the key priorities for Dorset because of the amount of thefts we had. But actually, the police took lead agency on that. We still worked with partners, but to resolve that issue. So I think it's important that if we was to have the CSP looking at everything, we'd achieve nothing. So it's about trying to look at those key priorities. But I want to give you reassurance that those other areas of the business, whether single or multiple agencies, still have traction, still have growth. But so for Dorset and for BCP, I've got the strategic thematic lead for missing children, most serious violence and neighbourhood crime. So I can guarantee you we're looking at our data, and if need be, I'll bring it up through. And a good example of that, actually, that links, moving on very quickly, links to your justice, is actually what we have identified is the lack of, if you look at the prevention triangle, you've got primary prevention, the universal approach, secondary, which is intervention, and tertiary is keeping people out of crisis. And just recently, looking at the child exploitation work, looking at ASB, actually recognising with austerity there's a gap in our youth provision for that secondary intervention, and already led through the CE group for CSP, which links to that justice gap, is understanding a piece of multi-agency work about actually how do we map what's our current offering and therefore what are our gaps then to commission services. And I think what's really important is the criminal justice side of things is there, and we've got the Dorset Criminal Justice Board, which is chaired by the PCC, and obviously we have a Pan Dorset Reducing Reoffending Board, and we're currently reviewing that strategy. It's up for review, so that's being reviewed. And our focus isn't just on criminal justice, but it's also on the use of civil orders as an example as well, and how we can use those effectively, because it isn't just about criminalising children, for argument's sake. It's looking how we can do meaningful intervention. However, there are some children that are in that catch and convict category, if you like, because they've gone beyond that. So it doesn't mean we don't look at it. In terms of your quick question for your PCP priorities and the police and crime plan, the priorities are not influenced by the PCC. They're influenced by the communities. They're influenced by the problems we're seeing in our communities. However, what's really, and it was really interesting when we overlaid the PCC's priorities with the current CSP, that actually they fitted quite nicely in there. But I can reassure you there's been no tweaking or anything based on that. It's based on the threat we see in our communities and what we need to respond to. And KPIs and improving that, of course, each individual organisation has their own KPIs, which they're responsible to, and we can aggregate those together. But I know through the delivery groups that are sitting under each pillar, then we're looking at, okay, what does success look like, and how do we demonstrate that we're actually, what we talk about having teeth is actually being delivered. And Kelly may want to contact and add some further to that. But that's certainly the direction that we're going into. The whole point being of the executive group is to hold the strategic delivery groups to account, to say, in this quarter, what have you delivered? What progress have you made? That's having an impact on our communities and making them feel safer. Kelly, I don't know whether you want to come in there.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. If I may just make a couple of additional comments. I do take Councillor Slade's point, and just to reassure that the Community Safety Partnership will be developing it is in the process of developing its crime and disorder reduction strategy. We're required to do that as a CSP, and we will be doing that. And the date we have is April 22. But just to say, I guess this is about this being about a journey from A to B, the end game being, the crime and disorder reduction strategy, but actually so much work that you can see, I hope, reflected in this report that gets us to a point where we have the right structure to deliver against those priorities. And there are some things that don't shout out in the paper that you've seen, but we do have a strategic group of the CSP, which will eventually form its own strategy in that one strand around safer communities. So part of that is going to be, and I hope you noticed our new flashy logo. We wanted to make sure that the CSP has its own identity and that we can get out there into our communities and really talk to our communities about what matters to them and what their experiences look like of working with the different agencies, how we can, work together with our communities to resolve the issues. So that will be a particular strand. We have that running and in place, and Superintendent Gemma Morris is leading that piece of work alongside and working with all those other strategic groups that you will have seen in the appendices around the structure of the CSP that we now have. And I wouldn't have wanted us to have jumped into setting a crime and disorder reduction strategy without having done this review and taken those steps to really reviewing and considering whether we were fit for purpose in the way that we were set up and how that governance structure worked, because flowing through all of that will be that performance. And I dare say the next time we attend, which may well be when we come to the crime and disorder strategy itself, but certainly the next one of these annual scrutiny sessions, I think we'll be in a very different place. And not only will we be informed by and powered by that improved structure and that improved partnership working that really does, we're challenging ourselves here to think, okay, so how do we make the difference as a system working together and as partners, but also really informed by what's happening and what people's experiences out there in our communities. And on that note, I just wanted to pick up on the point. I think Councillor Slade mentioned that you felt that this was town centre orientated, and I just wanted to really reassure that is certainly not the case. This is a community safety partnership that is doing its best to look at the issues across the whole of the geography, and to consider then how we work together as partners to tackle them.
Thank you very much. Councillor Earl.
Thank you, Chair. I like this. I think it's really important to look at the context surrounding sort of crime and disorder in communities, but just looking at the board and the delivery or strategic groups and also the subgroups, I wanted to ask about
if and how we might be utilising lived experience. So involving people who have been victims or even people who have been perpetrators to share their experiences, so we can use that to help tackle particularly the causes, and whether that's helping inform the work of the groups or the broader CSP. Thanks.
Is that one for you, Kelly?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. The
you.
answer is absolutely yes. You may recall, Councillor Earl, when we presented the domestic abuse strategy, that was one of the things that a really sort of key pillar of that was really talking to people and understanding those lived experiences. And really, that's what I was outlining just a second ago in terms of needing to get out there and talk to our communities and understand across a number of different issues what that lived experience looks like, and that might be people who, you know, a set community in a certain geography, a certain part of the community, local businesses. There's an awful lot to do, and I think there's an acceptance and an acknowledgement from within the partnership that, you know, if you ask the average BCP resident what the Safer BCP partnership is, they probably don't know right now what that does. We want to change that, so we've got a communication strategy that and as I say, I won't keep plugging the logo, but there is a branding piece of work and an identity sort of piece of work happening, comms strategy to really support that, and then really importantly a specific community engagement strategy. So looking at how we work on in a strengths-based approach to, you know, talking to our communities to develop that understanding, but also talking about, back to that point that Mark made around the cause of the cause and the public health approach, how we all work together in doing that really important preventative kind of work within our communities, and in, of course, back to your point, Councillor Earl, in really understanding what people's experiences are, so that informs our strategies.
If I may, just very quickly, we can give in the last couple of weeks, two very practical examples of knife crime in children, where we're actually trying to do a video of somebody who's turned their life around and use that in our FAKE campaign. And just in the last week or so, we had a multi-agency group where we had a survivor of child sexploitation and child exploitation present to cross partnerships, and actually got her how she survived, and actually how we could change what we do for the future. So we've got some real live tangibles how we're taking that forward.
Thank you. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. I think actually a few of my points have probably just been answered, really. I just felt it's a great paper, but I felt that there was not so much, the word community was mentioned quite a lot without actually saying a lot how you're going to communicate with the community, but you've just sort of said you have got a communication strategy. Because I had thought that you might have mentioned some groups in the paper, such as Neighbourhood Watch and the crime prevention panels and the nighttime economy that we have here in Bournemouth. And I didn't really see any mention on how you will use social media, because a lot of communities have their own Facebook pages, and I think possibly you could use it sort of through there. There wasn't a lot of mention of technology in the paper. Being a keen advocate of the Ring doorbell, and I know there are other ones, but I do find that very, very useful. And I think a lot of older people, if they have the technology to be able to use a Ring doorbell, to be able to see who's at their door, I think it's absolutely brilliant. And also, with Councillor Slade had mentioned, there wasn't any mention of the youth services. So hopefully, when you come out with the communication strategy, that these sort of people will be mentioned in that.
Did you want to respond to any of that, Kelly?
If Mark had any points, just as it's been raised a couple of times, and sorry I didn't cover it before, youth services, they're absolutely a key player of the Community Safety Partnership, and not least in the focused groups that we have, particularly around looking at child exploitation and those sorts of issues. So just to give you that reassurance. I take the point about, you know, use of technology. There's and again, I think it's for us, that's about how we develop that work in terms of sharing good practice and things that are helpful in terms of prevention, community to community. And for us, as Councillor Edwards just mentioned, you know, there's a really active Facebook set of Facebook groups that we can really tap into, and that's what I can't stress enough, there will be a separate comms strategy which might look at, you know, the key points of engagement in terms of Facebook and other social media options, as well as, you know, how we all communicate generally as partners and as a partnership. But that community engagement piece is just so absolutely important to that, and that's not just about getting out to the different forums and the different meetings that are taking place, but actually exploring some of those strengths-based approaches and building on and developing what's already there, because there's great stuff happening out there in our communities. And of course, things like Neighbourhood Watch are a big sort of resource for us to tap into in this context. So please rest assured that is very much part of the programme.
Thank you, Councillor Dedman.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Oh, excuse me. I've got a few questions. One has been answered already about the youth services and that approach, but I would just say that there are 6 statutory bodies and then there are 14 other bodies, and the educational bodies are right down the bottom at 19 and 20. So I really do think we should stress that they are very, very important. Chairman, I've got a question. Community protection warning letters are mentioned. I think, I'm not sure if they're in the appendix or wherever I saw them. And you've given a list of how many letters have been sent out, which is very interesting. But it doesn't actually say whether the results are audited. I mean, I'm assuming they are, but I think that should be written more forcefully in the paper, that there is a result. Somebody gets a letter, unlike political stuff that we send out, which is always put straight in the bin. You know, I just hope that that isn't the end of these community protection warning letters. So that's one question. And the other question, I think it's mentioned on page 58 about the serious offences, which I totally understand. And some of them are very, very serious. But then you mention low harm offences. And I'm not sure what they are. I mean, I'm assuming, well, I don't know. No, I will ask what they are. And then the other thing that I wanted to say, which is not a question, but it's the result of having been in local government for so many years, is when I see the words multi-agency, I always feel, I hope this isn't a way to keep passing the parcel round and round. And I'm sure it won't be. I'm sure we will manage not to have that. But I would like the 2 questions, the community protection warning letter and the low harm offences, if somebody could answer those for me.
Thank you, Kelly. Is that for you?
Yeah, I was going to ask Mark to cover off the low harm offences, and I'll cover off the points about CPNs, if that's okay. So CPNs, yeah, I mean, it's a part of the tools that we use to deal with difficult behaviours and challenging behaviours. I take the point about the need to make sure that there's sort of an audit process and sort of quality assurance, if you like. We do, and in fact, we're going through an exercise at the moment looking at how effective CPNs have been, particularly around street-based antisocial behaviour, and looking at how effective they've been in promoting both promoting positive responses, which sometimes we do ask for specific positive requirements to be met within community protection notices, but also then to stop the behaviours that are causing harassment, alarm and distress to other members of the community. So we're working through that at the moment, and I think what's interesting is my experience is, and I'm sure other people on the call will say the same, that no two cases are really the same. You know, we do have evidence that CPNs are effective in terms of preventing an escalation, but we also have a number of very difficult, complex cases where we do see an escalation to other enforcement tools that are available to us. So I'm happy actually can provide some information. I haven't got it immediately available to me, but Councillor Dedman, I can provide some information about the escalations that kind of move through that give an indication of how successful our community protection notices are. And also just on that point, just to say there is a stage before a full community protection notice, which is a community protection notice warning, and actually often we find that is enough. So that it's meaningful in the sense that that formal warning of potential action if a person continues with their with the activity that they're engaging in is often very successful. So I can provide a little bit more detail around how that's deployed and the successes of that. But just to give you reassurance that yes, from a tactical perspective, we certainly do review. Sorry, that's my Siri. We certainly do review that and ensure that those quality outcomes are there, because it's absolutely such a key important point in terms of how particularly we deal with antisocial behaviour.
And if I come in around the low harm offences, so first off, I think if anybody's a victim of crime, they'll suffer a level of harm, whether that be a short period, or whether that's financial loss, whether that's anguish in terms of anxiety, etc. But I think when we use the term low harm offences, clearly those high harm offences are where people have been raped, serious violence, so life-changing injuries, been injured with knives, etc. So that longer term impact on them, just like a high value theft or a vulnerable elderly person who's been subject to fraud. And in fact, fraud, we look at volume fraud, but we actually single out high harm fraud, particularly around our elderly population that we see around things. When we talk about low harm offences, we are really talking about that theft from a motor vehicle. Now, again, when any victim of crime reports a crime to us, we do what's called a Thrive assessment. So actually, if that victim of crime is a carer and something's been stolen out of their vehicle and it's an important piece of medical equipment, for argument's sake, then that actually would be a high harm offence potentially. So we actually take each crime on its merits in terms of the impact. But those volume crimes, which are no crime straightforward, and if you can understand what I'm trying to articulate, well, theft from vehicles, maybe broken into allotment shed, etc. They would be classed as our low harm offences. But to reiterate, we take it on a bespoke basis. It depends on the circumstances of the victim at the time. Does that help?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gabriel.
Oh, thanks, Chair. I just wanted to ask how the report authors engage with people with disabilities and those with learning needs that require extra support. I wonder if there's a conduit for that. Thank you.
Want me to take some of this, Kelly, from someone's perspective?
Yep, go. Yep, please.
So we have if I look at this from a slight lens of a policing aspect and hate crime, in particular about crime around disability, etc., then we have bespoke groups led, which have got partnership attendance. One of my superintendents, Gemma Morris, actually leads on this area of the business for us. So actually we have separate, in terms of those, in terms of the defined characteristics, disabled being a key one, is that we've got groups where we can actually engage with and make sure we get that feedback and we can present to them as well. So the clearly defined groups, LGBT, a whole range of different characteristics are covered off there. So there's that engagement. In addition, through our contact through, for example, policing or through health, etc., we share information and data with each other so we can actually understand what the issues the communities have and how what we're doing supports them from that. The health through CCG and NHS have now got a intelligence tool which is really effective, but it gives us really good population data which we can overlay with other partnership data to actually truly understand our deprivation, the types of communities that are seeing health inequalities linked to crime, etc. So that one of the key things in all CSP is about how we share information is something that we've really grasped the nettle of, and we're really driving forward to make sure we do share information, which gives us a richer picture of what's going on. I don't know, Kelly, if you want to add anything.
I was actually just going to cover that last point that you made. An absolutely key part of what we're trying to achieve here is making sure that we have that information sharing in place, and that as Mark referred to it as that richer picture, which of course picks up, you know, understanding of where there's disproportionate impact potentially in certain areas. Certainly, I think it's fair to say that the typical sort of model that we've adopted before for our strategic assessment has been very much driven by police data, but actually the work that we're doing now really draws that out to look at a much wider ranging picture and sort of fuller story that would take account of some of those, you know, some of those challenges that we see.
Okay, yeah, thanks. That's reassuring. Can I just ask the officers if they could, if they haven't done so already, get in touch with People's First Forum, which is an advocacy group for people with learning difficulties in the BCP area. I'm pretty sure they'd be like to get involved in this going forwards, because obviously they have very specific issues according to their users. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. And just to reassure you again, I keep plugging the community engagement strategy, and that would be a really key important, you know, identifying those amazing groups that are already out there doing a lot of work in terms of pulling communities together and advocacy, and those different factors will be very much on our list of people to be in touch with once the community engagement side of things really gets up and running.
Councillor Stribley.
Thank you, Chairman. On part of the debate that's just gone on, I do understand that there are crimes of varying degrees, but I do object to the term low harm. Every crime causes harm. You may say, well, say some are severe harm or high harm or whatever, but to say low harm on it denigrates everything. And I can remember my induction many years ago as a magistrate, when the clerk of court said to us, there is no such thing as a minor criminal offence. If you steal a penny, you are a thief. If you steal £1 million, you are still a thief. One may have more impact on others, but the crime is the same. So it's the term low harm that I think upsets people, not whether you increase the strategy along other things. I hear, and I know we have teams doing great work in youth services, etc., etc. But are they doing a 9-to-5 job, or are they out and about in the evenings and weekends? And I'm referring in particular to Whitecliff, where we have probably, if not the best, one of the best, or we had one of the best children's playgrounds in the whole conurbation. People come 4 miles to bring their children down there for a couple of hours in the afternoon or a Sunday, or so they did. But it's been closed for months and months and months. There has been ongoing damage. One piece of equipment was severely damaged, and rather than fence off that one piece of equipment, the whole playground has been fenced off. There was delay in getting the spare parts, so nothing happened. Youths now congregate there on a regular basis, but surprisingly, no one can ever see them there, and more damage is being caused. And we're sitting there just almost saying, well, let them get on with it. I've raised the issue on a number of occasions. I've asked why we can't have CCTV there.
Can I just interject?
But
just
I get no response.
We're looking at the strategic objectives here of the overall human safety part. You're bringing it down to a very small issue. Well, although it's important, but can we please keep it at the appropriate level? We're looking at the organisation of the.
I agree with you, Chairman, except it's not a small issue. Yeah, I do apologise for bringing it down to one issue, because it is a serious. What are we doing to deal with, in effect, repeat offences, to stop them happening, to track down the youths that are doing it? We've had the police involved, supposedly we've had youth service involved. Nobody ever sees a thing, but the damage increases, and probably not just where I've described, but in other locations as well. Surely it must be possible to put in some technical device to perhaps trigger when issues are happening, so that we could get some evidence and some people there. It's just the frustration of, if you like, the repeat of a particular area, and I'm sure there are others that suffer from time to time, suffering from pointless vandalism. You can almost understand somebody pinching something if they have something to gain from it. Who has anything to gain from pointless vandalism? It does defeat me. I'm sure the psychologists probably have an answer, but
thank you,
I would
Scrutiny.
like to see something done, Chairman.
Yeah, I see it, but if you look at the organisation chart, you see there is actually a strategic group that is tasked at looking at those very specific, and that's probably the place where that kind of issue needs to be addressed.
But if they're sitting in a room considering it, they won't be finding
excuse me, please. I will ask Kelly Ansell just to give a quick response if you can. Bear in mind that we are getting very short of time now, and I'd like to bring this one to a close as soon as possible now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bartlett. Just to pick up on the point about low harm, and again, I think it's a fair challenge. Yeah, that's probably language that we're used to using professionally that may not necessarily be the most helpful, and in terms of really understanding and acknowledging the impact. So I think it's probably quite a police-centric sort of set of language that we ought to consider. And again, that would be very important for us to consider in how we get those messages out to our communities through our comms strategy. So thank you for those points, and we'll take those away. And without getting into the specifics of the detail of the example that's been given, I agree with what Councillor Bartlett has said around the Safer Communities strategic group that is there to to tackle at a strategic level those sorts of trends and themes that we see in terms of hotspot areas of crime and antisocial behaviour, and we do already have a number of we're not setting up something new. We have tactical partnership work happening, and I think someone made the comment earlier about multi-agency. What does multi-agent does that mean just kind of passing things around? For me, absolutely not. Multi-agency, and my experience, which the vast majority of which has been in either Bournemouth Pool or BCP, is that multi-agency means collaboration and really working together to resolve the issues. So and multi-agency and collaboration for me really sort of then moves into how we work with our communities, and an absolutely key part of that is encouraging communities to report when these issues are happening, because we are just powerless to act unless the issues have been reported to us, so that intel can be gathered, and so that tasking can be, there is a finite amount of resource, and tasking needs to be conducted appropriately. But just to reassure, from a tactical perspective, we do have a means through the Community Safety Partnership and that multi-agency collaboration that identifies the hotspot areas and takes a sort of problem-solving approach to handling those sorts of issues. So I guess my overall message would be, when communities are experiencing those issues, please report them either to the council's ASB team or, of course, to the police on 101.
And I still await an appropriate response in due course. Thank you.
Councillor Slade.
Thank you. Sorry for coming back. I forgot to ask this, and this might seem slightly odd, but I don't want to sound like a prude, but drug taking in BCP seems to be endemic. You cannot go to the beach without being hit by the reek of cannabis, marijuana, or whatever it is. It hits you. And the same when you go to the town centres. Now, each to their own. But the point about it is that every time I've challenged about why we aren't doing anything about it, it's so endemic. What are you supposed to do? Every single person that's actually taking those drugs is actually doing so illegally, which means, presumably, that they're accessing people who are dealing. And those people are probably dealing other things that are far more dangerous. So I'm struggling to understand why it is that if there are 20, 30, 40,000 people in BCP who are accessing illegal drug dealers, why we aren't recognising that those drug dealers are the same people who are ultimately going to be involved in county lines, shoplifting, violent behaviour, sex crimes. Am I missing something? Because to me, we've either got to decide to regularise certain types of drugs so that people aren't being criminalised, or we have to deal with it. This current line doesn't seem to be working for anybody, and is potentially putting even another generation of kids into harm's way by following their parents in carrying on taking the illegal drugs.
Thank you, Councillor Slade. Before I ask you to respond to that, Kelly, I did think that was going to be a quick question. It actually was quite a complex question, and the answer, no doubt, we could talk about all afternoon, actually.
Is there a strategy?
Yeah, but I mean, if you wouldn't mind, I'd just like to roll a couple of things into that, if I may, and then I'd just like to give you a chance to respond, Kelly, and then I think we'll close this debate. And the issue that I've got is that, you know, that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 strategic groups who meet, I think, bi-monthly. That must involve an awful lot of people. It's over 30 meetings per year. You've got the executive itself that I think meets quarterly. I think you said in the report, so another 4 meetings. And then you've got the working groups, etc. under there, you know, a lot more people. You know, how on earth is all of this pulled together? And just administratively, it's a massive thing. I think it would be nice to understand what the outputs are from this. And it brings me to, I think, the point about the maturity of the organisation here. We do understand that through LGR, we've of course had to bring the local authorities together. Then we had the COVID, of course. So it's hardly surprising that the development of the CSP is probably still, you know, undergoing its maturity. It's still not there. And I think you've made that quite clear. There's a long way to go. Albeit there have been some successes made as well, and you've listed some of them. But it is clear that there's quite a lot more to go. It's really reassuring to hear that the CSP is not the end of it. It's part of the overall strategy for crime and disorder reduction, which we're going to be hearing about next year. So I'm sure we'll hear a bit more about how the community safety partnership is evolved at that point, which will be great, and we do need to look at this again. But you know, when there's all this effort going on, and it's great to hear that you are going to have a community engagement strategy and a common strategy to go along with it, and I'm sure that is something that we really need to see, because then the community will actually see all these resources being ploughed into this partnership, what it's actually doing and what it hopes to achieve. And then hopefully the community can really get involved with this. Which does bring me to the last point I want to raise, and that is about critical events, which the report talks about. And without going into any details of critical events, and these are the ones that have a real impact on the community, where it drives the community to, you know, have you dealt with any? Has the CSP dealt with any critical events? I don't want to know what they were if you have. I'd just be interested to know if you've had any and how they are then dealt with, and how that's then fed back through to the community or local authority or whatever. And that does actually encompass, I think, some of the issues that Councillor Slade has made about drugs, because it's on the community's mind all the time, and the impact of it across our society is a massive thing that we all care passionately about. So I think that just a few things you might like to come back on, Kelly, and then we'll close it down, I think, at that point. Thank you.
Just a few things there. Thank you. Mark, did you want to come in first, and then I'll
Yeah. So I'll keep it really brief. Then maybe we can do joint effort, Kelly. I think so. I think the really important thing about the CSP is about how it coordinates the partnership together. Now, the issue around all those pillars, that everybody in those statutory responsibilities are all doing things around domestic abuse, around things. If we don't bring them together under a CSP and coordinate it, then that work is being done in silo. And we've talked about things today that actually the police have got primacy for, or health have got primacy, but actually we're bringing them together to prevent duplication and have a bigger bang around it. And I'm glad that we're not going to go into the legalising of drugs today, because that's probably one for wider government, I suspect, and another debate for a different day. Yes, I absolutely agree. We've got some challenges on our streets with drug dealers, from Class A drugs through to Class B drugs, county lines, the link to child exploitation. And actually, if you look at the whole system and those pillars of work, and you look at drugs and mental health and alcohol, you can overlay a child from starting in antisocial behaviour, then starting to come up to public place violence, knife crime linkage, then into child exploitation. So we've got to be victim and family focused. Actually, these pillars of work are about pulling all the threads together. So we're not working in silo, we're not duplicating, and actually we're having a significant impact on our communities and our families. Because in the past, we've worked in silos, and in my opinion, that's where CSPs working in silo organisations, that's where we've created environments where we maybe pull in different directions. But actually, the one solid thing around these strategic groups is about how we can make sure we're pulling in the right direction around things. In terms of the critical aspect of things, we've had death of a child, and there are other similar cases where working in the partnership, and you'd argue COVID was such an issue as well for us, where pulling together, we've been able to, children's services, health, CSP, police, etc., pulling together about what is our response for the greater good of the communities and how we're going to respond to that. And Kelly, I'll let you talk about how we pull those strategic groups together, because the strategic leads come together as well, don't we, to make sure that we're all on the same page and we're delivering.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Just before I do, just as you've finished on the sort of point about Councillor Bartlett's question about critical events, you know, we do have critical events that happen in BCP, and one of the responsibilities of the CSP, one of the statutory responsibilities, is to lead and coordinate and take the learning that comes from domestic homicide reviews. So there is a Home Office process that we have to follow, whereby case reviews are conducted with the involvement of the families in those circumstances, and a real sort of assessment of what's happened in those cases, as on top of other serious case review type situations that we would learn from. And then also just to pick up on the point around, I guess not to get into Councillor Slade's question, and as Mark has said, but just to note that from a strategic perspective, for the first time in my experience locally, we have a specific strategic group which has a focus on reducing harm from substance misuse, and that's absolutely, as Mark alluded to at the beginning in his opening comments, you know, those issues flow through everything that we're dealing with as a CSP and as partners working in where you know, in health services, in social care, in housing, and any given number of different ways. There are lots and lots of challenges, and you know, those issues do culminate in crime and antisocial behaviour. So that's a key priority for us moving forward, and we've put that in place. And I take the point about you know, this is a big partnership. I'm glad you see how you know how much work goes into it. We pull that all together. We've got strategic leads. So one of the meetings that isn't reflected on the chart, I'm sorry to add another one in there, but myself and the other strategic leads meet on a regular basis, as those people responsible for chairing those groups and pulling that together into how do we escalate this up, and you know, so that again we're never working in silos, always really challenging how we can work together as a whole set of public agencies to deliver with our own priorities for our strategic groups in mind, but those overarching objectives of the CSP absolutely driving what we do. And that question of so what? So where does the value come from in terms of all that time and all that effort and all those hours? that go into the good people that are sat around the table to work through these issues. Outputs. We do need a performance framework for the CSP, and that will be a key next step for next year. And we'll be proposing some performance outputs for monitoring through our crime and disorder reduction strategy. And of course, the other thing to say is this isn't just the council and the police delivering this. This is a partnership, and one of the conversations that we're having and challenging each other around the table on at the moment is who brings what into the CSP in terms of partnership resources, and that's a key part of that maturity and that development, of the partnership arrangement to really power that structure that you've seen that admittedly is we're ambitious. We're ambitious about the difference that we can make as partners, and we need the right structure in place. It's the whole reason why we've decided to conduct the review, to really sort of take this agenda forward and tackle those very challenging issues out there in our communities.
Thank you very much, Kelly. So I think we'll now bring this debate to an end. I'd like to thank you very much and your officers for their work, and also to Mark for being here today. And it's good to see this shaping up. We will look forward to seeing you again in at least a year's time, if not probably at 6 months' time, and maybe around April or May. Possibly that's something we can talk about. So with no further ado, I thank you very much.
Thank you for your time, everybody.
Thank you. So members, agenda item 7, a scrutiny of biodiversity net gain cabinet report, aim 2. And this, I think, relates very much to a statutory requirement to introduce. Sorry? Thank you, Councillor Scrutiny. You've just cut me off in my prime. Yes, so this introduces an item which I believe is being introduced as a result of statutory legislation. It introduces this biodiversity net gain into the planning system, and a fairly detailed report on it, which I hope we've all read, and I'll call upon Councillor Broadhead to introduce the paper. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. And yes, happy to give a brief introduction. As you've pointed out, this paper is, well, there's actually 2 parts to this paper. The first of all is accepting that biodiversity is very important, particularly getting that net gain. And although the legislation has come in, how can we, with some immediacy, bring that into what we do in terms of our planning policies? So the first recommendation is, well, let's just accept that we just need to get on and do this as soon as possible, as a matter of priority. The rest of the paper is laying the groundwork for what actually adopting it properly will mean, both the financial impact and a number of the points that we'll have to consider, and then asking for a team to go away, an officer team, a task force within the Planning and Environment Directorates, to then come back within 6 months with some formal recommendations for exactly how we can really embed this into our offer. So I mean, a bit of background for those that don't know about biodiversity, but the whole point is biodiversity net gain to make the area better in biodiversity terms than it was before. And as you pointed out, Chair, the government have now put this into legislation. The Environment Act came in only last month, November 2021, and within that act it now embeds into legislation a mandatory 10% biodiversity net gain. So that now has to take place. There is a 2-year period in which we can bring that into force, and also new within this as well is that not just a 10% net biodiversity gain, but also that has to be maintained for 30 years as well. So that has some real impacts, some real positive impacts. I think we can all kind of agree that it's a really positive move from the government. Of course, now we have to look at how we can put that into practice and what that means. So as I mentioned, we've got 2 years to implement this. We have bits of biodiversity net gain already embedded into our planning policy, but it's not particularly well defined. The only place where it's actually properly mentioned is in the existing pool local plan. where it talks about a net biodiversity gain, but actually doesn't give any prescribed level. So we do already take it into account. But again, the recommendation one of this paper is that to say, well, actually, let's put this in, at pace. The rest of the paper is talking about a lot of the things that we'll have to consider when we're putting that into practice. So the government within the Environment Act has made it really clear that any attempt to introduce this has to be predicated by a recognised and accredited scheme. So there's a number of different ways in which that will be able to be benchmarked and judged. The Biodiversity 3.0 metric toolkit, which has been prepared with Natural England, is the main one. In fact, most of the accredited schemes have been prepared hand in hand with Natural England as well. That's the kind of the standard metric that we'll be having to look at and look at using. There's also something called the SSM, which is a small sites metric, and that's designed to kind of simplify the process for small sites, because it's sometimes a little bit harder to do on very small sites. And then also the EBNT, which is a tool that has been put together as well to help make sure that biodiversity, when it's put into action, has some real positive benefits for people as well, such as water quality, flood management, carbon storage, because we can do this and do this biodiversity net gain and also have other positive impacts as well. And government and Natural England have incorporated that into how they're going to assess this, so that we can make sure we're not just doing biodiversity net gain, but actually there's some other positive impacts as well. So a lot of different working parts to consider, and of course the main difficulty will be in order to look at the net gain, you've got to establish the baseline for the existing biodiversity state before the new development takes place. And as I mentioned earlier, because this will have to happen over an extended period of 30 years, we'll have to do some detailed work with government to find out exactly how involved we are as a local authority in that long-term monitoring role as well. That this is all quite aside from the putting the strategy into place within the local plan, which is related but a separate piece of work. This is very much about the operational side. How can we actually make sure that from a planning policy point of view this is going to work? So that's what we're trying to do. We've asked officers to go away and come up with some options and recommendations, bring that back within 6 months. This paper gives a permission to do that, and also recognise that there is going to be a resource implication of that. I think we're talking about 2 additional ecology officers, and we've got this is quite a big task. We have about 4,500 applications per annum in the area, and this will now become law and legislation. So we'll have to do it on absolutely every single site. There is talk of perhaps with some of the bigger sites where it's a bit harder to get that 10% net gain, whether there will be an ability to kind of buy a token and then do that net biodiversity net gain elsewhere. But lots and lots to consider. That's the background of what we're trying to achieve here, Chair. Happy to take any questions. What we've also said in this paper as well is highlighted in paragraph 21. In the meantime, within the next 6 months, we're bringing together this framework of how this is going to work. And incidentally, most local authorities are taking a much more long-term view and saying, well, we've got 2 years to come up with this. We're saying, no, actually 2 years, we want to get on with it with some immediacy. So I'm very confident within 6 months, we will be one of the first to implement it as the Environment Act dictates. But in the meantime, to say, well, actually, this is important enough to give a very clear steer that in the interim, until we come up with that longer term solution, that we really should be seeking biodiversity net gain on all appropriate sites right now before that long term fix comes into place. That's the background for the paper, very much about that final project coming back in 6 months, but happy to take any questions. And Nick Perrins is here, who's far more of an expert on this than I am as well.
Thank you, Councillor Broadhead. Members, Councillor Hadley first.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, certainly welcome the initiative, the principle that we should be looking at net gain. I'm actually quite concerned about how we achieve it in practice. And I'm also really concerned if the larger developments get an opportunity to somehow notionally just offload their commitment, because we've seen that with social housing, and it's resulted in not really getting the social housing in place. They should have the ability to actually do more than 10%, because they have the scale, the opportunity to perhaps think about their site. But I think key for me is actually, how do you get 10% gain when you cover over half of a site with a building, and clearly there's green roofs and green walls and other things that you can think about, and grey water recycling, many of the things that we would like to see. So I'm really concerned about the idea of offloading obligations via tokens. That's just a cop-out as far as I can see. I'm also a bit concerned about us being in the vanguard, because we already have the Ramsar, obviously Poole Harbour, we have the heathland mitigation. There's a lot of obligations on developers already, and actually the people who are buying the houses, house prices are very expensive as a result. So you know, to be right at the front of this, is that a load that actually, you know, when we're struggling to actually get things out of the ground, certainly in Poole, we've really struggled to get developers to actually build what they plan to build or what they get planning permission for. And it's you know, they may see it as yet another obligation. So there's something about how we can work with developers to actually make them see the sense and the benefit to the people who will be resident in these buildings. And then under paragraph 23, it talks about how we fund this, and possibly out of planning obligations or SIL. And again, that worries me hugely. We've had a number of other areas where SIL seems to have been raided as a sort of magic money pot, and I think I'm concerned about SIL just being spent on this, on heathland mitigation, on harbour mitigation, and nothing being available to actually improve the community assets that SIL was intended to support. So I'm quite concerned about that one. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Broadhead.
Yes, Chair. I agree with most of Councillor Hadley's comments. You know, in my introduction, I wasn't for one moment condoning the idea of being able to kind of offset in a different location. You know, quite the contrary. I would agree with Councillor Hadley. For the larger sites, actually, you have a little bit more room to play with, so there should be more innovative ways to do it. And I also understand his concern that if we go too quickly, I mean, to paraphrase what he's saying, if we've got 2 years and we've got development challenges locally, why not just push it to the end of 2 years and not put any more barriers in place of developers, so that we can get development going and kind of worry about it later. That's a two-dimensional characteristic, but I think that's kind of the basis of what he's saying. I'd slightly take the opposite view. The benefit of, I mean, the government knows this is complicated, which is why it's put a 2-year a window in to try and get this right. It's pretty clear that there's going to have to be some quite creative solutions, particularly on the actually on the small sites is quite hard, and on the big sites it's quite hard as well. Actually, when you look at the practicalities. I think by going early on this, rather than just waiting, we have an opportunity to work with the development community and Natural England and others to try to have a little bit more time to get it right. Because if we left it too late, okay, sure, we could learn from others, but also it might come as a, you know, as a very big shock to the development community. You know, I talked about the impact it's going to have on the planning service itself, so 4,500 applications, and we have to be part of that, but it will be a shock to the development industry as well. So I think going early, going, you know, hand in hand with our ecological partners and our development partners means that we can hopefully try and get to the bottom of this and work out those you know, intricacies sooner rather than later. So yes, that could mean that some of the bigger sites are a bit more tricky, but you know what, I'm up for that challenge. And I think, you know, particularly some of these larger sites that we are involved with as a local authority as well, we have an opportunity to set the tone. The ongoing finance is one thing that it mentions in paragraph 23 that will have to come out in the wash. In the short term, we are committing to fund it through the MTFP process and the budget. I think the aim of that paragraph, that point that he mentions, is that in the long term, this is going to have an ongoing impact. Do we just want to continue funding it as another pressure, or are there other ways that we could explore through planning obligations, or, as it says there, SIL regime? So not necessarily paying for it necessarily out of the current SIL, but it, you know, might well be something to explore, whether there's an additional SIL point coming through. I mean, it's so far off on all of that I don't think we'll know. And of course, government is constantly updating legislation in this area as well, because I think they'll recognise the challenge both on the development community and local authorities as well.
Thank you, Councillor Stribley.
Thank you, Chairman. I too welcome this. I think we probably all do. And it's a mandatory obligation to get an improvement which will last for 30 years. So I hope that also means that we start to get a better quality of development, because there are few, not that many, but there are a few developers who throw up rubbish, get out as fast as they can, change the name of their business and walk away without any obligations. And again, when it became that if you want application for 15 or more dwellings on a site, you had an obligation for affordable housing. Wow, I can't remember the last time I saw an application for 15 or 18 properties. They're all down to 14. How strange. I do think that we should also push government to perhaps look at existing planning permissions which have not been properly implemented, perhaps for 12 months or whatever, that they perhaps ought to be able to look back at those. There should be a reasonable time frame. And I don't mean implemented by just digging a corner of the foundations or one drain. I mean properly started on site, because there could well be quite a number in the pipeline. We all know quite large applications have gone through and nothing has happened, and it doesn't happen. And then we're told when it comes back for renewal, oh, well, we can't amend it because nothing's changed. Well, things are changing now with this Biodiversity Act, and I look forward to it improving the properties that are built in the area. Hopefully not too great a cost, because if you build it in from the ground up, then the cost shouldn't be huge, and residents hopefully will still be able to afford their homes. When you look at quite nice houses built up north and they cost less than half a property down here, you think, well, the bricklayer gets paid the same, the plasterboard costs the same, the paint costs the same across the country. And you then start to think, where's the profit? It wasn't all in the ground or in the site. So I look forward to seeing a big improvement in the planning across the conurbation because of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Slubby. I don't think there was any questions in there, so I'm going to go on to Councillor Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair, but actually Councillor Hadley had the same question as me. So.
Thanks, Chair. Just for transparency, I should quickly say I own a business which does consultancy on green and blue roofing, so it kind of ties into this a little bit, what I'm going to say. With this, I really welcome it. I'm really glad to see it. I wish we'd seen it earlier, if anything, to be honest. What I don't want people to get the impression is we're not at the forefront of doing this. This has been happening in other places. Just because this act has just come in last month, we've known about this since the spring statements in 2019, when we were told that this was going to happen, and other councils have moved faster on it. Cornwall County Council, they had something going at the start of 2020 for biodiversity net gain, and they changed it again on declaration of their climate and ecological emergency, which we're in. So this could have come quicker. The good thing is that other people have done the work for us here. We already know what we need to be doing. We know where we need to be heading to get this. A really good example to look at is the Mayor of London, the Urban Green and Biodiversity Net Gain Design Guide, which everything's already laid out there for how we should be acting in this. So there's a lot there which we can look at. And I mean, I'd probably like to see us go further where we're putting this in place. We've got developments. We live in Bournemouth, Christchurch Pool. We know that on one side we're surrounded by the sea, the rest we've got green fields there, and it's not a surprise we are going to see greenfield development one way or another. It's going to start to happen, and this is the sort of stuff we can start getting into our local plan, where we can ask for more than 10% of biodiversity net gain when we're going outwards, and we're not using brownfield sites, we're looking at greenfield sites. So yeah, for me, great work. Let's get it done. Let's go a little bit further on it, and I think we should just get it in the local plan and start acting on it as quick as possible. I mean, developers and that, they know this is coming. We've been talking about it in construction since 2016, 17, 18. We've known it's going to happen, and developers will continue just getting away with the bare essentials, which they can do for as long as we let them. So let's just get it in the plan and say, let's do it. Granted, we've got a lot of homeowners it might be a little bit more difficult for, but I've dealt with residents who've tried to get a green roof on their roof. At the moment, when they've been doing dormer extensions and are planning services just saying, no, sorry, you've got to use the materials which you're currently building out of to get planning, and they want to do this already, yet we're holding them up by not having it as part of our local plan. So the quicker the better for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ribby. Again, I don't think there are any questions in there. There was lots of comments. Just hang on a minute, Councillor Broadhead. We'll bring in a couple of the other councillors, and then maybe you just wind up with a final response overall. Councillor Haynes.
Thank you, Chair. Like the previous speakers, I do welcome this paper. So I do have a question, actually, to raise, which is that it follows on very nicely from what Councillor Rigby has actually just said, where he said the quicker we bring this into the local plan, the better. So in the paper, it says that they're asking Cabinet seeking approval from Cabinet to form an officer group, which will then bring another report back in 6 months. So my question is, what is the time frame for this? Because at the same time, we also have a working group that's actually dealing with the local plan, the new local plan for BCP, and now we have this other separate strand of work. So are they all going to fit in and form part of the new local plan, or will this be two separate pieces of work? And if they are two separate pieces of work, will this net biodiversity gain, SPD or whatever it ends up being called, actually therefore come in as a requirement prior to the local plan being approved? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think that's a pretty straightforward question for you there, Councillor Broadhead. So yeah, thank you.
Absolutely, Chair. Happy to do that. And then if there aren't any more questions, I can just sum up as well.
I've got one more councillor who wants to come in. So
okay, I'll answer this one first then. Straightforward question. The answer is yes. This is definitely going to go into the local plan, not least because this is now government legislation. The slight issue is we're still in the process of preparing our local plan. So actually, if we want to get in and as both Councillor Rigby and Councillor Haynes have said, do it with some pace. If we wait for the local plan, we won't be able to embed it sooner. So I think there's a strong argument for actually getting in there ahead of the local plan, not least because, as it spells out in this paper, most of the graft that the council are going to have to do to figure out how to do this is going to have to be done anyway. So it's not really two pieces of work. It's just doing the necessary bits of the local plan sooner rather than later, and that's two parts. First of all, what I hope will be a fully formed plan for how this will be put into potentially via an SPV within 6 months, but also seeking Cabinet's approval to embed the principle of this, maybe not in a quite strict way, with some immediacy. So already applications that are coming through the system, we can already now say, because at the moment we don't have anything apart from pool applications that says that we require a net biodiversity gain. So saying yes, we'll require it now is the immediate one, and then within 6 months hopefully come forward with something that A is quicker than the local plan, but B has done all the graft of the local plan. Just final point, Councillor Rigby talks about others. Absolutely, many other local authorities are trying hard on this. Can't beat ourselves up too much on this. He's absolutely right. Cornwall are a little ahead, but they only made the planning necessity for major applications, not minor ones, and they are still in the stage of drafting out pretty much exactly what we're trying to do here. So Cornwall currently do it for major applications. We're saying let's do it for all applications, hopefully within the next 6 months to the 10%, and in the meantime just get on and do what we can do.
Thank you, Councillor Broadhead. Councillor Slade, then followed by Councillor Lawton, and that will be the last question. Thank you.
Thank you. There are developers out there who are delivering on this and have been delivering on it for a little while. I know of one that's at 20%. All of their properties going forward will be at 20% biodiversity net gain. So I think there are plenty of really good quality developers out there who want to do the right thing. I think going fast on this is going to encourage those developers, and if the others don't like it, well, there's plenty of other places that they can go and build their they're not very environmentally friendly buildings, I suppose. I've got a couple of concerns about whether the money's being spent in the right place. Referring back to what Councillor Rigby said, if you want to build an extension and you want a green roof, then the 2 ecology officers aren't really going to help you very much. Would it not be better to invest the money in making sure that every single planning officer is trained and that the relevant officers have climate literacy so that they understand how best all these applications can be managed, rather than spending it on ecology officers when we're actually going to be using a government tool to benchmark anyway? It feels like a very simplistic ask, 2 ecology officers, put them in a box, that's sorted, rather than actually overhauling the way we think about our planning applications themselves. And I just wondered whether we had given any thought to spending it a different way. And the only other thing I wondered about was whether there's been any lobbying done around new burdens funding, because if it is a new burden on local authorities, normally these new burdens come with a chunk of money from government in order to be able to upskill or provide resource. And if that hasn't been offered, what's happening with the MPs to ask them for some more money for local authorities generally?
I think there's clearly a couple of short. The first one is almost an operational one, probably for Nick Perrin, but the second one is definitely for you, Councillor Broadhead. So maybe we could take it in that order. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm very happy to come in at this point on the operational question. Councillor says absolutely right in terms of upskilling of planning officers. That has to be part of this stage. We feel we're probably under-resourced on ecology officers anyway, just in terms of where we are now. There's already quite a big ask on ecology reports, biodiversity reports, and the planning system to have the experts. And it's
sorry, Nick, you're
straightforward application.
Sorry, Nick, you're breaking the point that we can't understand what you're saying now. Maybe try turning your camera off and we'll just listen to you. Maybe that might help. Are you still there, Nick? He's gone.
I am.
Okay, you're back again. Let's okay, go ahead. No. I think we've lost you, Nick. So, Councillor Broadhead, you lucky chap, you can answer the question. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The short answer to what Nick was about to say is you'll have to ask Nick. So maybe we'll have to get Nick to come back on the operational reasons of how the service will be responding to that. I don't think it's quite as simple as having an ecology team that just do that and everyone else do their own thing. Clearly, this is a central part to all future planning applications. However, we do need some extra resource right now to figure out exactly how we're going to make it work, because as it spells out in the paper, there's a number of choices within the legislation for how we want to enact it. And Councillor Hadley spoke earlier on about not automatically just giving a free card for doing it on other land rather than your own. Well, that's a choice that we will have within our powers to make. So, but I will get Nick, when he's available, to come back to you with the specific point of how they envision that looking. And again, that will probably be part of the report that will come back to us within 6 months as well. With regards to the national funding package, well, again, it also talks in the paper around the fact that we are still waiting for a little bit more clarity from government around both how aspects of this will function and further guidance, and also the funding package as well, if there are any extra abilities either to get extra funding from government or to be able to raise the money locally to be able to do this. Only last week I was actually in London at a Climate and Ecology conference, so this was one of the topics that we were discussing there. All local authorities are in exactly the same position, and that they'll have to be embedding this into their planning policy within that 2-year period. Government recognises that, and I think there's going to be more detail coming out both on its implementation and the funding hopefully shortly. In the meantime, we've got a plan for what we know.
Councillor Lawton.
Thank you, Chair. As the previous portfolio holder for housing, I thought I'd just give the panel, it's not a question, give the panel an update on where we were on the biodiversity. I think most of us can agree that this piece of legislation is an excellent piece of legislation, which we can all agree with. This is a quick statement of where we are. The current sites within the BCP area do not fall within that, i.e. they don't have biodiversity agreements. However, future sites obviously will do. We do at the present time as a council, all our current sites have ecological assessments carried out and provide ecological enhancements. But as we're aware, and as Councillor Broadhead has pointed out and Nick Perrins has pointed out, is we will be employing ecological officers to carry out further investigation. We're only scratching the surface at the moment. But just to give the panel a quick update, there is a new development coming on stream, which new people will be moving into in the new year at Luckham Road. And part of that assessment, we have provided 4 sparrow boxes and 2 hedgehog hotels. Now, don't ask me what a hedgehog hotel is, because I haven't got the faintest idea, unless somebody on the panel can enhance me. Is it like a travel lodge? Is it something like that? I don't really know. Moorside Road has a slow worm hypernacula, whatever that is, on and off site, as well as bat boxes, nest boxes, swift house, martin boxes, and house sparrows. And there's also been carried out native planting for wildflower meadows, nectar sources for invertebrates and birds. So although the legislation is coming on stream and we all agree with it, I would like to say that we as a council have not been slow there's a lot more to do, but we haven't ignored any future legislation coming down the track on new developments. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Wharton.
See, that's taken. Here.
Okay, I think that'd be the end of that debate now. Unless there was anything final, we just want to close off with, Phil. I think that we've probably done it now.
No, Chair, just thank you for the debate. I'll be really pleased to come back in, hopefully within 6 months, when we have a little bit more flesh on exactly how we're going to do the big solution on this. But in the meantime, my hope is if approved by Cabinet, it means we can, with some immediacy, put the net biodiversity gain into practice ASAP. A lot of work to do. 10% net gain over a 30-year extended period is quite, is quite a push. But hopefully, as Councillor Rigby says, that means that we're coming up with some much longer term solutions rather than just short fixes. But thank you for everyone for your support.
Thank you, Councillor Ward. I'm just wondering what the LGA can do to help us with this as well. Just a point, you're up there quite frequently. Okay, thank you very much. So we're going to, I think we'll have a 5-minute adjournment now, just a quick comfort break. So if you could stop the live stream, please, Jill. I hope we're all refreshed and ready to start off again. I won't use the word kick off. I got into trouble last time I said kick off. Are we ready to kick off? So we'll come to agenda item 8, which is the call-in cabinet members' decision of the ETRO Tattenham Road. I think before I ask Jill to read out some of the public statements, I just want to give an outline of the procedure that we're going to go through. All right, so initially we'll ask Jill to read the public statements that have been submitted and she will read them out. I then ask our monitoring officer, Susan Zeiss, to introduce the report and the original cabinet member decision. I will then invite Councillor Stribley to present the reasons for the call-in. I will then ask Cabinet Portfolio Holder for Transport and Sustainability, Councillor Mike Green, to respond. I will then give a brief about the debate and the way it will be conducted. And then I will invite people that aren't on the board to speak, and that will include Councillor Felicity Rice. And then lastly, we will, if there are any, and there haven't any been made already, consider any motions or recommendations that may be outcoming from the debate or the process. Okay, Councillor Stribley?
Yes, Chairman, just on the process, I appreciate you say you're going to read out all the representations.
No, I didn't say that.
Oh,
I didn't say that.
Oh, that's all right.
Yeah. What I said was,
I have 84 here.
yes, what I said what we would do is read out the request for statements, not the representations. And that's what we're going to do now. Thank you.
I beg your pardon.
Thank you, Chairman. So these are statements in relation to agenda item 8. The first statement is from Ms. Corinne Martin. We can confirm that we have consulted with residents on Tattenham Road in May 2021 regarding the closure of this previously very busy road. The attached petition provides strong evidence that almost all residents of Tattenham Road support the road closure. The petition was signed by 67 households on Tattenham Road. We consulted with 76 households, out of which 67 agreed with the road closure and would like to keep it in place. 6 disagreed and 3 did not have an opinion either way. Statement from Mrs. Joanna Keats. Please see below a summary of feedback we collected from Tattenham residents to keep the Tattenham Road closure. 1. The noise from traffic has reduced significantly. 2. It is safer for pedestrians, especially school children, as well as cyclists. 3. Cycling and walking along the road have increased. 4. Residents' health, e.g. asthma, has improved. 5. Better sleep due to less noise and less anxiety about the risks to the children. And 6. Quite a few residents were initially against the closure, but have now changed their mind and fully support it, my husband included. Statement from Mr. Nick Baxter. I have been a resident of Tattenham Road since 1998. Tattenham Road has become safer for residents, safer for pedestrians, safer for school children, safer for cyclists. Tattenham Road has become quieter for residents, quieter for pedestrians, quieter for school children, quieter for cyclists. There is less pollution, there are less fumes, no HGVs, no boy racers, less litter, keep it closed. And a statement from a local resident. Before the road closure, there was excessive speeding and aggressive driving. Even the speed limit reduction from 30 to 20 with signage made no difference. Since the closure, safety and residential life has dramatically improved, with less risk of severe accidents, reduced noise and pollution. Also, increased cyclist and pedestrian use. However, some speeding motorcyclists still ignore the closure. With over 20 years of residents raising many issues about the safety of Tattenham Road, it is only possible to understand the dramatic change if you are a resident. The only sensible decision is for the road to remain closed permanently. Statement from Mr. Roger and Mrs. Gillian Green. We are extremely concerned this closure may be removed. It is in complete opposition to the general direction we're being encouraged to travel by government and disregards the health and well-being of residents. Passing vehicles created raising pollution levels, unacceptable noise and considerable danger for pedestrians, cyclists, pets and children. This is a residential road which became a cut-through for many, including emergency vehicles travelling far too fast. There wasn't provision for cyclists or to cross the road, despite 2 large schools, or enforcement of the 20 miles per hour limit. We urge you to retain the closure, making it permanent. Statement from Lucy Allen, Chair, BH Active Travel. BH Active Travel supports the modal filter on Tatnam Road, ETR07, for the following reasons. It provides a safer, quiet way for children travelling to Oakdale Junior, Longfleet Primary and Poole High Schools, in addition to quietening Garland Road. Maximum journey increase for motorists is stated as only 18 seconds. Child safety should be absolutely paramount and take priority over the mild inconvenience for motorists. We trust the ONS committee will note that there have been 0 collisions since the closure, 7 during 2017 to 2019. Children do not get a vote or view, but this closure affects them the most. Statement from Mrs. Caroline Blunden. As a resident, I was sceptical of the proposal to close one end of Tatnam Road, thinking it would impact my commute time significantly. I reserved judgment on the scheme until the end of the trial period and responded to the consultation with a much changed view. The road is now far safer and I am seeing more pedestrians and cyclists. I have realised the alternative routes have not impacted my journey times. I suggest the Council focuses its efforts on more pressing matters rather than pander to antisocial drivers who disrespect low traffic neighbourhoods and the welfare of others. Statement from Mr. Paul Blunden. I recommend the Council dismiss any consideration to revisit the Tatnam Road closure. Anyone who has observed traffic on the road will have witnessed how the road's layout makes it unsuitable and dangerous for through traffic. It should remain only for access. Furthermore, a council defending non-essential motorist routes in preference to a progressive view on developing 21st century public transport systems that better protect our local environment is widely misguided. The merits and motives for defending a handful of upset rat runners rather than spend council time on more pressing taxpayer priorities is questionable and should end today. Statement from Sheila Martin. Tatnam Road should be reopened. The closure does not promote cycling. Very few cyclists use it. It adds time to journeys, pushing all traffic onto Wimborne Road, increasing pollution and congestion. There is nowhere else for traffic to go now, as they can't filter off into minor roads. People rely on their car for shopping, commuting and travel, and this closure has made life increasingly difficult for them. A few fair weather cyclists in the summer hardly warrants road closures for the rest of us. Majority of residents surveyed want it reopened, but we are ignored. Statement from Kate Salter. ETR07 near to 2 schools has provided a safer route to school and green spaces, Poole Park and Upton Country Park. 9 collisions 2017 to 2019, 0 since closure, despite 1 year of schools open. Head teacher of a 3rd local school supports it. 100 pedestrian movements every 15 minutes across the junction since closure. Negatives reported. Forecasted journey time increase is negligible. Worst case 18 seconds extra journey time. Displaced traffic marginal at worst. All quotes from the council's own report. If this unclassified residential road can't be kept shut, what safe routes are the council providing for children and others without car access? Statement from Bob Salter. I wholeheartedly support the closure of Tatnam Road for through traffic. It fits in perfectly with the BCP big plan to promote active travel. Low cost, high benefits. The council has an objective to reduce road casualties, and this minor residential road and allied junctions had 9 collisions in 2017-2019, so closure has removed much of this risk. Road is used by many school children. Complements transforming travel improvements on Wimborne Road as a secondary cycle route. Huge knock-on benefits for Garland Road, much quieter and safer. Closure has transformed my commute, cycle now rather than drive. And finally, a statement from Alicia Askew, Poole Living Streets Group. As Poole Living Streets representatives, whose aims promote everyday walking, we fully support the council's effort improving conditions for walking and cycling along Wimborne Road. However, to enable school children and those with disabilities to walk, cycle and scoot safely, the side roads need attention too. The modal filter on Tatnam Road, in conjunction with the one on Birds Hill Road, has significantly reduced traffic cutting through these roads, making it safer for everyone using these routes for Oakdale, Longfleet and Poole High schools, particularly at the junctions. Please retain this to show commitment to the Safer Routes to School programme. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Ms. Sice, our monitoring officer, can I bring you in now, please?
Thank you, Chair. There has just been a very short covering report written for this item to be brought to overview and scrutiny because this is not the forum at which a decision can be made on this matter. The only matter before the committee today is whether or not to offer advice on this matter to Cabinet and possibly refer it back to Cabinet at its meeting on the 15th of December. So call-in is simply the referral of a decision made but not yet executed to the Overview and Scrutiny Board. Call-in powers relate to executive functions only, in other words, those of the Cabinet or the portfolio holders under delegation from the leader. And it's important that the call-in process is not abused and should only be used when councillors believe that the decision is not made in accordance with the principles of decision-making set out in Article 12 of the Constitution, was neither published in accordance with the requirements of the Cabinet Forward Plan nor subject to the general exception or special urgency procedures, and is not in accordance with the key policy framework or budget. So the councillors who submitted this request for call-in have complied with the criteria for the acceptance of it as a request. And my determination as monitoring officer was that it did meet those requirements in that it had more than 3 councillors who are members of the Overview and Scrutiny Board making the request, and that the request gave reasons for the call-in. Moving on then to the decision-making process or how the portfolio holder decision was made in the first place. Under the executive model of governance, which we have in this council, which is the cabinet and leader model, the leader may delegate certain decisions to portfolio holders within his cabinet, and he has done this under a specific delegation, which has been published. For this reason, officers draft the portfolio holder in a very clear way, because that decision is being taken by an individual person and not in a group cabinet. So it's usually subject to more rigorous scrutiny than cabinet decisions possibly are. So before it's made, the proposed decision must be published for representation from councillors and the public for at least 5 clear days. I also want to point out to committee that, and members of the public who might be listening, that those 5 clear days for representation are not consultation. They are there for representations in the same way as when cabinet agendas and reports are published. People have the opportunity to decide whether or not they want to come and speak at cabinet or whether or not they want to lobby their local councillors. And so it's not a consultation, it's a representation period. The next steps are that the Overview and Scrutiny Board can either offer no advice and the decision may be implemented immediately, or it can offer advice to Cabinet, which will be heard at the next available meeting, which is the one on the 15th of December. And then Cabinet on the 15th can consider the advice, but it's not bound to accept it in whole or in part. It has a sole discretion, and if it decides, whatever decision it makes, whether it accepts the advice or not, there's no further right of call-in, and the decision may be implemented. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Slade, you got a point?
A point of clarification, monitoring officer. So the request for call-in isn't about the decision itself and whether we agree with it. It's about whether the decision-making process was followed in accordance with the Constitution. Can you just clarify? Thank you.
Yes, that's correct, Councillor Slade. So if there are criteria for this Overview and Scrutiny Board to think that the decision wasn't made in accordance with the articles of principles of decision making, it can then refer the matter back to Cabinet for further consideration. But the decision itself is not up for discussion today.
All right, Councillor Slade, thank you.
Thank you, that's perfect. Thank you.
Right, now I invite Councillor Stribley to present the reasons for the call-in. and this is really critical, members, please listen very carefully to the reasons, because that's what we have to examine to see if they are valid. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. And I do hear what has been said, which slightly bemuses me that we had some statements read out when there are many, many more, including from residents in Tatnam Road. And we heard that 76 households had been consulted. There are actually 120 households in Tatnam Road, plus a small cul-de-sac at the far end of Tatnam Road, with another, I think, 8 or 10 properties in, maybe 12. I'm not quite certain of those numbers.
Councillor Stribby, can I just interject? Sorry to interrupt you. You have 5 minutes to make the statement of why it was called in.
Okay.
If you want me to clarify the issue again about those representations, I will do so.
I will ask afterwards. And may I, after my 5 minutes, if there is any debate, may I come back at the end or not?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. In which case I will be a little briefer to start with. Members, today we're considering a call-in of the Tatnam Road closure, a matter I've raised and brought to committee because of the overwhelming objections constantly being sent to Pool's MP, Sir Robert Sims. The decisions on ETROs should be made after due process, and in this instance, I believe that some of those processes were inadvertently overlooked or were slightly lacking, that due consideration was not given to the results of the consultation, and the clearly serious adverse effects of the closure on surrounding roads. So I'm therefore requesting your support simply to send this matter back to Cabinet for reconsideration. The original process required consultation, not only with those residents living in the road, but with all those directly affected by the decision. This clearly was overlooked, and therefore I believe the decision to be unlawful, or at least inappropriate. The final decision was made on what the ward councillors wanted, not on the clear results of the consultation, which I believe registered some 80% against retaining the closure. That is not what the ETRO process required. That is not democracy. Councillors who clearly and boldly push their own views, agendas, or vested interests are not acting in the best interests of their residents. They are not representing the views of their residents as they were clearly elected to do. We've all signed up to reducing our carbon footprint and helping reverse the effects of global warming. Indeed, only today, BCP Council has been praised for its progress in that regard. However, I do believe those who prepared the report failed to consider and take into account the adverse effects of some of the ill-thought-out road closures. We hear there was supposed to be only an 18-second delay. That may be true if you count every vehicle going along Wimborne Road over a 24-hour period, but it's not the actual fact of the matter. When Poole Park was closed, we were told there was only a few minutes delay on Parkston Road. And over 24 hours, that was true, but the reality of it was the delays at rush hours were anything from 24 to 50 minutes, with traffic piling up back over Towngate Bridge. So there are lies, damn lies and statistics, and we need to really understand what we're looking at. Road closures in themselves do not increase residents' propensity to cycle. They do not encourage more cyclists. Road closures simply mean that drivers have to follow alternative routes, thereby adding to congestion, longer journeys, junctions which fail because they're suddenly carrying more traffic than their flow capacity can accommodate, and consequently much increased air pollution, the very thing we've all signed up to reduce as soon as possible. Where we can put in proper cycle lanes to protect cyclists and separate them from motorised vehicles, then we should do that, no question. But to close off smaller residential roads that have always acted as minor distributor roads is a nonsense, an inconvenience to many, a danger to some, particularly when emergency vehicles have to be diverted, and seriously adding to global warming, which every sane person wishes to avoid. Because I do believe the decision to close Tatnam Road was taken without entirely following the correct procedures and fully taking into account all the relevant information, including the results of the earlier consultation, a very recent survey being clearly 9-1 in favour of reopening. I do ask that you support this call-in and send it back to Cabinet for their reconsideration. It should not be a political matter. It should be a matter of common sense and a matter of listening to our residents. Whilst I was in Tatnam Road for about an hour and Well Lane, the little cul-de-sac at the end, doing a delivery, I met several parents picking up their children from school and asked them how they were affected. They were all immensely upset and irritated by the closure. And one parent said, well, how can I bring my child to school on a bicycle? I have one 7-year-old, one 3-year-old, and a 6-month-old baby. It's simply not possible or
30
practical.
seconds, please. 30
So
seconds.
I will finish up. Public highways are just that. They are for the free passage of the public on foot, on 2 wheels or on 4. No one owns the area outside their front gate. Residents of Tatnam Road drive over other residential roads when they are moving around and about. We should consider everyone who generally used Tatnam Road and the very many properties that still wish to do so. I simply request your support to send this matter back to Cabinet, and I have a number were rejected by the council because the recipients were asked to email Claire Johnston, and a number of them have emailed Claire Johnson, who plainly doesn't exist. But because my office was copied in, I have them here. I also have the people who want it to be retained as a closure. So I'm very happy to submit all those papers as well, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Swively. Thank you. There were 4 members of the committee that called this decision in. And I'd like to give them, the others the opportunity of speaking. And I see that Councillor Gabriel is here. Would you like to speak?
Yeah, thanks, Chair, for the opportunity. I'm just looking at the portfolio comments on the bottom of his decision-making process, which he clearly indicates that he has put his faith, perhaps too much faith, in the ward councillors' opinions rather than the consultation. So that was my reason for calling this in, and to support the overwhelming majority of the residents in that area. So I hope that helps, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Green, your turn.
Yes, Chair.
Please come on in.
Would you just like me to respond, Chairman?
Yes, I would. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think probably the place to start is how I have made how I came to the decision that I did.
Can I just remind you, you've got 5 minutes, please.
Oh, okay. I wasn't aware of that, but yeah. My starting position in all of these is that I will start by supporting the ward councillors if I possibly can, and then what I do is I go through and I look at the benefits and the disbenefits, which I tend to get from the consultation responses and the officer's report and a little bit of common sense, and I then weigh them up, and through those I decide whether there is one sufficiently outbalances the other, if you like, to make me want to move away from my initial position, which is to support the ward councillors. So in this case, the ward councillors are from Pooltown and Oakdale, and they are strongly in favour of retaining the ETRO. So I then went on to look at the benefits, and it's clear that there are significant benefits to this for the people who live in Tattenham Road, and possibly for a couple very, very close to the closure itself. And we've heard that, you heard it in the statements that came, and indeed when you look at the representations that came in that 5 days, almost all of the ones that were in favour of retaining the closures come from Tattenham Road. There are a few others who are people who are well known to us as supporters of active travel, but there is clearly substantial benefit to those who live in Tattenham Road, as indeed there would be in any other road in our borough, any other minor residential road which suffers from traffic. In fact, on one of the ones in Bournemouth, I was told recently that that one of the residents came up to the ward councillors and said, "Well, what you've done is you've increased the value of my home by 50,000. So you can actually see that there are real benefits for those people. You can also see from the consultation results that there is a smaller, to my mind, disbenefit to many more people. There is the displacement, which comes, in particular, been noticed Haynes Avenue, Stokes Avenue, Sturt Road, Palmer Road, Wimborne Road, which comes into it. And there is a journey time issue as well, which will affect a lot of people. Now, it does say in the report that it's between 14 and 18 seconds, according to the Saturn model. We've seen other representations that said it can be up to 15 minutes. I would have thought it would be far closer to the 14 to 18 seconds, certainly once people have got used to this. And that's what the model assumes. But yes, okay, there is a journey time increase. And there is an increase in the distance that's travelled, which obviously will have negative effects for carbon particularly. So there is a large benefit to a smaller number of people. There is a smaller benefit to a disbenefit to a large number of people. So what I've then got to do is try to assess one against the other. And I think we've got to be absolutely clear. This is not a Derby's Lane. As far as Derby's Lane is concerned, it is on the TCF route. It is a major cycle route, one that we are promoting and will be used to affect modal shift, and I think will have a significant effect on allowing people to choose a safe, fast alternative cycling route rather than travelling by car. So Derby's Lane, for me, has very clear benefits. It's not a keyhole bridge, because there the journey times, and we've seen it from the 2016 study, there was a significant displacement, very significant, and very significant effects on journey time. I do not believe, and I did not believe when even after reading all the representations, that there is a very significant problem with journey time or in displacement in this case, although some of this exists. And so where I am in this one is I believe and believed that neither of those two outweigh the other to a sufficient effect for me to want to say I will move away from my starting point of supporting the ward councillors, and that's why I've made the decision that I have. I can absolutely understand that some people feel that I should have started from a different perspective, and that my starting position should be that I respect the consultation results, and where do I move from that? And yeah, it's possible that if I did that, then I would have ended up with a different decision. In fact, it's probably quite likely that that would have been the case. I could have started from completely neutral and not listened to anyone else. Not that I would like to do that, but then I also may have come to a different decision. But it is within my right as a portfolio holder, and I have made very clear in the decisions I've made why I am doing this. I do believe, and I have been absolutely consistent in this throughout on the ETROs, and I will continue to be, as the rest of them are decided, that my starting position will be to support the ward councillors and then to see whether there is sufficient weight, one side or another, to drag me away from that position. And in this case, with the significant benefits to residents of Tattenham Road, the more the smaller weighted but much wider spread disbenefits to those in surrounding roads and those travelling through, I did not feel that there is sufficient weight to pull me away from it. So that's why I would defend the decision that I've made and defend my right to make the decision in that way. So I hope that helps. I'm very happy to answer any questions that any members have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor Green. Okay, members, I'm going to allow 3 minutes maximum for each member to speak on this matter, and I'm going to allow you to speak only once on it. Okay. Before I do that, I just want to make a couple of comments about the public statements. And as we said, we did have 12 public statements which have been read out. They were submitted in accordance with the Constitution and received by the deadline. And these were circulated to all the members. We also, late on Friday and over the course of the weekend, received numerous representations, and those have been circulated, albeit, as I said at the beginning of the meeting, it's very difficult when you receive as many as you do a few minutes before the meeting and haven't even a chance to read them. I have to say that it's not really been helpful either, because the numbers of representations that come in are all arguments about whether you should open the road or close the road. Now, the point is, the monitoring office made quite clear, we are not a decision-making body here. We're only here to look at the process that the portfolio holder went through and to decide if the requirements of Article 12 of the Constitution have been met in making that decision. And the call-in from Councillor Stribley and her colleagues has set out the reasons why they believe that decision has not been made in accordance with the Constitution. Now, during your debate, please focus on those reasons for the call-in, not all of the lobbying either side about the actual road closure or not. This is purely about the process. And if you conclude that there is any area of the reasons that Councillor Stribley has called in that are valid, in other words, that the decision has not been made in accordance with the Constitution, then there are grounds then to refer it, if necessary, to the Cabinet, okay? And just for clarity, I just want to make absolutely sure that we understand what it is we're looking at. And I refer to paragraph 8 of the report. The email notices of call-in from the respective councillors lists the grounds and reasons for the call-in as follows. With reference to the decision on the Tatnam Road ETRO, we do not feel that the principles of decision making as per Article 12 of the Constitution, subsections A, B, E and F, have been properly adhered to. In particular, we believe that there has been an over-reliance on the opinion of the ward councillors, and that undue weight has been given to those opinions over and above the wider consultation process. Okay. For ease of reference, the specific subsections of Article 12 that are cited in the call-in notice are as follows. Article 12.1.1. A, be clear about what the council wants to happen and how it will be achieved. B, ensure that the decision and the decision-making process are lawful. E, have due regard to the appropriate national, strategic, local policy and guidance. And F, ensure the action is proportionate to what the council wants to happen. So they have it. It's quite clear. And as I say, if there's any doubt over any one of those issues, then it's up to you to decide what you wish to do about it. So, members. Councillor Rice, I'll be inviting you to speak after the members of the board have spoken. Okay, thank you. So, members. Councillor Haynes.
Thank you, Chair. I think a lot of the reasons why this was called in has been outlined by Councillor Stribley, and I just wanted to expand further on the point that Councillor Gabriel has actually raised, because I understand, as you've said, Chair, that he was one of the signatories to the call-in. And in fact, I think Councillor Green, the portfolio holder, had alluded to it himself, which was that he had placed his decision on what the ward councillors had actually indicated to him was their preference, despite the fact that the consultation had come back with overwhelming numbers not supporting the ETRO. Now, I know we're not actually looking at that specifically because the reasons for the call-in are set out there. So I would actually home in on Article 12.1.1 E, where it says due regard to appropriate national strategic, and here it is local policy and guidance. Now, according to our corporate strategy, and there is a poster of it tacked up on the wall opposite me, it actually says on there that we're passionate about our communities. So I take it that if we're passionate about our community, so therefore due consideration has to be given to the fact that it wasn't a 50-50 as to whether people were in support or not in support, but it was a very, very clear case that there was no support for the scheme, but yet the decision went with the ward councillor. So I do question whether it is actually made in accordance with our local policy and the guidance that we therefore have. But I think also the other point that I want to raise is, I think someone had actually alluded to it. I think it was Councillor Stribley that said that the representations that were read out by the clerk were mainly people that lived on Tatnam Road. That's fine. I haven't got an issue with that. But I just think that when a decision is made, that it has to be made not just for local and, in this instance, very, very local benefit, but for a greater, wider benefit, because this is a strategic issue and not just to make a road quieter for a small number of residents that live within BCP. So I think because of that, I think it does contravene Article 12.1.1 E specifically. So I would support the call-in. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Haynes. Councillor Hadley. We've got 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I find this call-in deeply hypocritical. Same councillor who overread public opinion on to push reopening of Keyhole Bridge is leading the opposite here. She's also vocal previously in suggesting ward councillors shouldn't interfere in each other's wards, and yet she, as she said herself, she was standing in Tatnam Road circulating leaflets and creating this. It's really important. Tatnam Road has a very long history of concerns from the residents about the level of traffic on that road. And if you don't know, it's a very narrow road with 2 bends in it, 2 fairly sharp bends very quickly, one after the other. And there have been quite a large number of accidents, enough to make it a cluster site for crashes, particularly at the junction at the far end with Stanley Green Road. And that's why the officers recommended that the closure be at that end of the road and not at any other point in the road. In January 2007, there was safety work at Tatnam Junction. In July 2011, the Transport Advisory Group in Poole received a petition for the safety scheme signed by 58 residents in the road and elsewhere. And in September 2018, Councillor Stribley actually chaired a session of the Transport Advisory Group, which looked at and then implemented a 20-mile-an-hour zone and build-outs in that road. I couldn't attend the meeting. I was on the committee at that time, but I supported the aims and objected to the methods. I said it would not work in reducing speed, and indeed it did not do so. So in December 2019, there was work being undertaken to prepare for consultation on closure and where that might be in the road. That obviously got overtaken by COVID. So when the Department for Transport looked at, in early May of that year, looked at how we might do it, it was one of the 800 schemes that was ranked and prioritised by council officers based on the proximity to 3 schools, cluster site for crashes, and as part of the strategic network. There's 4 grounds that have been raised as to why this should be reviewed. One is about being clear about what the council wants to do. There was very clear guidance to the Department for Transport Actually, it's in gear change, the national strategy for enhancing walking and cycling, and it states that bollards and closing minor roads that are unsuitable for through traffic is a key, simple and quick measure to achieve that. It was based on recommendations from the officers. It was based on the cluster site for the crashes, as we heard from one of the respondents, 9 of them. It was based on the two petitions to Transport Advisory Group previously. There have been many other closures historically. Most of Heckford Park is closed, Millstock Road at the New Inn, Rectory Road on Fleets Lane, various roads in Poole Old Town, Coy Pond Road, Compton Road at Sandicotes Road, Bolson Road by Seaview. The list goes on and on. All around the conurbation, there are roads that have been closed off because they're unsuitable for through traffic, and it becomes intolerable for the people living in those roads to do it. But importantly, this worked with for Garland Road and for Longfleet School and Oakdale School. And
can you wind up, please, Councillor Hadley, please.
Ensuring it's lawful. In contrast to the decision at Keyhole Bridge, this information is lawful, and the experimental traffic regulation orders have been used before. Due regard to national strategic and local policy guidance, as I said, gear change, the South East Dorset local transport plans, the Hartlepool delivery plan, which actually recommends closing this road, ensuring it's proportional to what the council wants to happen, clearly safe routes to school, adjacent to transport and travel network, and a route for key workers to Poole Hospital. And those are key elements, and I think it's actually tragic that a small group of Conservatives have been agitating so many people, putting democratic services through such a lot of work, and actually upsetting a lot of residents receive that message, and we're really affronted. Thank you.
Are there any other members? Councillor Dedman.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I have to admit that I had to drive down from Muddyford to actually find where this site is, because it's obviously not on my radar, being from right over there. And clearly I'm not aware of the history of the site, which has been very well delineated, whatever. But I've got a question, really, that the councillors who have brought this to our committee are complaining that the portfolio holder says that he will rely on ward councillors. He will in the future, as well as he has with this. So are the councillors that brought this back saying that won't happen in future? Because I think that would be a very, very bad step. Ward councillors are here for a reason. And so I do hope that that isn't what's being suggested, that ward councillors' views will not in future be considered. I have experience of Councillor Green's reliance on ward councillors, and he is extremely good at doing that. So I found that a really bad reason for bringing it back. I do feel that we are only considering the process, and I cannot see anywhere in the decision-making process where it has not been followed correctly. So I'm going to stop there, but my recommendation would be at some point that we offer no advice to Cabinet and cease and desist, not decease, sorry. Desist, yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Striff.
Thank you, Councillor Dedman, and I'm sure that Councillor Green will respond to the point that you made when I ask him to come back in a moment. Councillor Slade?
Thank you. I've been very clear on focusing about the reasons for this call-in. That, you know, it's not our decision to make; it's the portfolio holder's decision to make. I haven't agreed with every decision he's made in the past, but it is his job to do so. He's been given that delegation, and that's what we need to respect. And I've focused very much on 12.1.1. Are we clear about what the council wants to happen? Yes. Is the decision lawful? Yes. Does it have due regard to national, strategic, local and policy? Yes. And is it proportionate? Yes. I'm finding it very difficult to understand how the people who've brought this have pulled out those reasons. The suggestion that there wasn't a consultation is quite befuddling, because there was a consultation from summer 2020 to March 2021. More than the required 6 months, during which time I know it was there because I put in my own views, because I do cycle that route, and I would not have cycled that route whilst it was a busy road, but it's now combined with, as lots of people have said, the Birds Hill route, now deemed a pretty nice route to go from Fleets Lane and Holes Bay right the way across to the Civic Centre and the hospital. And I think, you know, there is absolutely a consultation there. Hundreds of people responded to it. So I think it's a bit bizarre to suggest there wasn't a consultation. There was then a further consultation when the decision was announced that this was going to be made permanent, and we've actually got all the results from that second consultation. So that doesn't make any sense. The other issue I have real worries with is officers have been very clear in describing the benefits of this scheme in terms of road safety, propensity to cycle, school traffic, etc. And looking at the traffic counters, and I've raised some queries through officers in the last few days to try and understand it better, they're quite clear that their modelling shows that it doesn't have a significant negative effect. And I don't understand how we can be expected to take the advice of the officers in one place. For example, Lansdowne was abandoned because apparently it would cause too much of a delay. And yet in this one where it's seconds, we're expected to say, oh no, the officers don't know what they're talking about. The officers know what they're talking about. The officers have said this is actually a positive scheme. And as Councillor Hadley says, I was working with Councillor Hadley when COVID first hit, and we were asked to make a long list of places where measures to improve active travel should be prioritised. This has always been prioritised. I do recall the time in Poole as we've done more and more measures in this road to make it safer. And Heckford Park is the perfect example of where this has been done decades ago. Elizabeth Road, Kingston Road are all now dead ends that are a delight, not just for the people who live on them, but for the whole area where there's no rat running, no speeding. And to take it to the other side of town, I was in Boscombe yesterday.
Can you wind up, please,
I will.
Catherine?
I was in Boscombe yesterday visiting the hospital for a COVID jab, and there are a number of roads over there that have had one-way systems in to make them safer. This is part of a bigger agenda, and there is no point doing TCF on the main roads if the roads on the sides don't allow you to cycle there safely. So I do not see any reason, and I agree with Councillor Debman that there is no reason to give advice on this one.
Thank you, Councillor Slade. Members. Okay, it looks. Councillor Rigby, I'm going to bring you in at the end, if I may, Councillor Rigby.
So on, yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'm kind of taking the similar side to what Councillor Dedman and Councillor Slade are saying with this, and I was unsure. I quite enjoyed debating on policy because it's laid down there in exactly what's in front of us and the interpretations of it. I think Councillor Haynes, what you said earlier about local policy and the fact that we have got communities there in our corporate strategy, it is true, but there's a lot of other things in our local policy as well. And under the connected communities bit, there's where is it now? I was looking, respect and engage with our diverse communities, reduce load isolation, and ensure our communities feel safe. And I think a lot of what people have been responding to is saying it's a lot safer for people commuting to school and a lot safer on that street now. So I think when we're looking at it, I do believe the portfolio holder has weighed up the various ways that this can be looked at, and not every single thing we've put in place is necessarily going to hit every single local policy which we want it to, but does it hit enough of what we want it to each time, and can that be done? So I do believe in this case that the portfolio holder has weighed up. He's been very clear on how his decisions have been made, and I can't see how this can be called in except on the fact that the decision isn't liked, as opposed to the fact that it's not being done in the way that it should be. So again, I don't think there's anything we can offer to Cabinet on this.
Thank you, Councillor Rigby. Councillor Kelsey.
Thanks, Chairman. Yeah, I've been listening very carefully to this and trying to understand it all. One of the things I'd just like to ask, if we can put a question to the portfolio holder, possibly, is I believe that national local policy is to reduce carbon emissions, and having traffic travelling further to get to the same point doesn't actually do that. So can I have a response from him on that, please?
Have you got anything else that you want to add later? Because it might, if you've got.
No, I'm fine at the moment. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, just a moment then. Are there any other members that wish to speak at this time? Okay, in that case, I'm going to bring in Councillor Felicity Rice, please. And I'll ask you, Councillor Green, to respond to that question when we ask you to sum up in a minute. Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Rice.
Hi, thank you very much. First of all, I wanted to highlight on the report at page 185, there was a reference about an email to myself from the head teacher at Poole High School. A crucial point of this is to be aware that the email was sent at the beginning of the trial at a time to readjust their daily routines because they were just coming back to school after 6 months off COVID. And since that email had been included in the report, I thought it was useful to inform you all that an additional email was sent by the head teacher at Poole High School 8 months later, so in June 2021. And that same head teacher was able to confirm that we now have a 25% increase in pupils cycling to school at around 200 a day mark. So hopefully this is additional insight as committee. I can also confirm that the head teacher of Oakdale School, which is a primary school, which has an exit out onto Tatnam Road via Well Lane, is also very supportive of the ETRO because it makes it safer for walking and cycling for primary school age children too. As this paper states, the purpose of the ETRO was to discourage through traffic from using residential roads. It was to create additional space where people can cycle safely and walk to local amenities, particularly children, and it is part of a strategic route along Garland Road and Parkstone Road. The Director of Transport, I'm sure, can explain the cluster sites for injuries at Tatnam Road and explain why the CTRO has made a significant difference to road danger if the committee needs to understand this further. I believe that this decision has been made in keeping with the Council's declaration of a climate emergency, plus various policies on supporting walking and cycling and bus use, policies on road safety, policies on reducing inequalities, plus national policies for improving cycling and walking. One clip of a policy paragraph is on page 15 of the Department for Transport's local transport note, published in July 2020, which is a really interesting read. It was only published a year and a half ago, really useful to read. Anyway, it states, the simplest, cheapest interventions can be the most effective. Perhaps the single most important tool to promote cycling may be the humble bollard, or in our case, the planter, used to prevent through motor traffic. Such low-cost modal filters, like the one on Tatnam Road, can increase safety by reducing through traffic while retaining cycling and pedestrian access, provided they have real effect. So they must be on residential roads that have an issue with excessive traffic, such as Tatnam Road. Then interventions such as planters and bollards are preferred over elaborate and costly ones. And that is directly from the government within the last 18 months. So in summary for me, this is a decision that the portfolio holder has made that is in keeping with relevant local council policy and process and national policy. Yes, ward councillors agree, but actually the important thing here is that it's all within local council policy and national policy. And I don't feel there are any reasons for this to be referred to Cabinet. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rice. Okay, I'm going to ask Councillor Green to sum up, and then I will ask Councillor Stribley to sum up as well. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I ask, do I have, I don't think I'll take much longer than 5 minutes, but do I have any time? I would like to try to address each of those that have come up, but you tell me how much time I've got.
No, I can be flexible on the summing up process.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. I don't think I'll be much longer than that, but I'll try to pick up everything that's come up, if that's all right. To start with Councillor Rice, there do seem to be two different opinions. And again, I'm just going to try and do this as fairly as I can, and hopefully it'll give me a bit of illustration into how I weigh up the benefits and the disbenefits. But there do seem to be two different ideas about whether it's improved safeties at school. Clearly, having read through all of the representations, there seem to be quite a number that talk about that it's become more difficult and more dangerous at school drop-off time. Against that, we've got the head teachers, 2 head teachers now, who are saying that that it has become easier and that it has become more people are travelling to school more sustainably. So I think it's up to members of the board to decide which interest they have there, if you like. But I would sort of say that the head teachers have probably got a better idea than particular parents. But again, it's up to the board to decide on that one. Turning to Councillor Haynes, was talking about the consideration of communities within the local policy, and I think that's very true, that decisions do need to be made for the wider benefit. But at the same time, there is a community within Tattenham Road. There is a wider Oakdale community, and there is a community within Tattenham Road, which sounds as though it's very much got together on this. So again, I think it's fair to say that we want to make the decision for the widest benefit, but I'm not sure it's fair to say that we hadn't made this for the communities. Turning to Councillor Slade, 3 things I just want to bring up on this one. The first is that it's maybe the most important one for me in making the decision, which is around the propensity to cycle. And I'm afraid I don't see it on this one, and I made it very clear earlier. This is certainly a secondary, if at best, route. In fact, it's identified as a secondary route on the local cycling and walking infrastructure plan that's going out to consultation. It isn't a primary route, and when I was weighing this up, I did not see this as being something that is likely to affect the modal shift that I am after, and I believe that we need to stop the congestion. Secondly, on the delay times, it isn't the officers that said that it was 18 seconds. It's the Saturn model that said that once everything settled down, they believe that it should be that it should come out at 18 seconds. The models aren't necessarily right, but I would put more trust in it being closer to 18 seconds than I would the 15 minutes that we were told by some of the representations. I would guess it's going to be somewhere within that range, but probably down towards the lower end of the range, and maybe improving over time. So I think that does come into it. I'm afraid I can't avoid this one, Mr. Chairman, because I'd have to say that out of the whole of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, you seem to be the only one who has been consistent across this and the previous call-in we had on Keyhole Bridge about whether we're here to discuss process or whether to discuss the decision itself. And it's quite interesting, the swap around that we seem to have in many members who were arguing one way at Keyhole Bridge and arguing a very different way at this side, and that comes on both sides. Councillor Kelsey talking about whether this complies with national and local policy because of the increase in carbon dioxide, that's an increase in emissions coming from the longer journeys. That one is a really interesting one, because I think if somebody asked for an absolute decision, absolute consideration as to whether this was producing more carbon or less carbon by having the road closed, I'd probably have to agree that it produces more carbon, which would go against our climate action policies. But as far as the national policies are concerned, and that's been brought out by a couple of speakers today, gear change is absolutely clear that we should be pushing towards low traffic neighbourhoods. So I think it can be read either way. And if we were to go directly according to the gear change and the other recent documents that have come out, they are in favour of those low cost measures. But yes, I think we have to say that this one does probably increase carbon at least over the next few years. And maybe if I can finish, Mr. Chairman, just on Councillor Dedman and Councillor Rigby. Thank you to Councillor Rigby for saying it's very clear how the decision is made. I think I have done that, and I have tried to make it consistent with all of the ETRO decisions that I've got. Councillor Dedman, if this is called, if this call-in is successful and it gets referred back to Cabinet, is that saying that the Overview and Scrutiny Board would like me to pay more attention to to other representations and less to ward councillors, well, I'd say yes, it is saying that. I would be sorry about that, because that is where I want to start. I want to start by saying the ward councillors will know more about their particular location than others, and I want to be able to support them. But yeah, so yes, if it does go that way, then from my point of view, unfortunately, that will mean that I have to reflect that in future decisions that I make. Does that answer all the points we've had so far, Mr. Chairman?
I think that's an issue. Councillor Stribley.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to Councillor Green too for his summary, because I do appreciate the difficulty of his position. And yes, of course, ward councillors should be taken into consideration, but I do believe that their opinions should not override clear public opinion when a consultation has taken place, as it has in this case. And it needs, in effect, to be balanced. We hear that there were 9 accidents before the road closure. They're not on the police record anywhere. That really, I'm afraid, is hearsay. If the portfolio holder is suggesting one of the reasons for keeping this open is increased value in property values, then every residential road, including mine, will probably be asked to be turned into a cul-de-sac, and we can all take advantage of our increased property prices. That.
Yes, point of order.
The crashes, that was directly taken from police records. Those were minor serious or fatal injuries as recorded by the police. That wasn't hearsay.
So what is the point of order here?
It's untrue what you just said.
Thank you for the correction.
I'd just like to bring the monitoring officer in, please. Thank you.
Chairman, a point of order can be a point of clarification if there is a deemed inaccuracy in what's been stated in the chamber. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stribley.
Thanks, Chairman. Sorry, I've slightly lost my flow. Many of the children at the adjacent school, accessed one way from Well Lane, the other way from Palmer Road, are from Poole Town Centre, because it was Poole Town First School which moved to that site. And they are all really concerned that they now have to negotiate Hunger Hill Roundabout, Towngate Bridge, the George Roundabout, and a very busy Wimborne Road, and a long length of Tattenham Road to get their children to school. From their point of view, it is not an improvement, but I know we're not arguing the point on that. I do believe that the consultation was very clear. It was about 80% against having the road closure. Had it been 50-50, I would have been entirely with Councillor Green and saying, yes, well, to take the ward councillors into consideration, but it is not. There are many representations in here from people actually living in Tattenham Road who are against the closure, and I'm very happy for those to go onto the record as well. The serious disadvantages to Stokes Avenue and Haynes Avenue, which are off Tattenham Road, is also was not taken into consideration at the closure. So I simply urge members to support the move, simply to send this back to Cabinet for a rethink. The council decided to close the road. The council could decide to open the road. It may choose not to do so, but I do believe, because there is really so much furor, anger, concern, upset, as well as appreciation of the closure, that it really does need to be properly reconsidered. So, Chairman, I think Councillor Haynes said she was in favour of it going back to Cabinet. If that was a proposal, I would be very happy to second that.
Councillor Haynes.
In fact, Chair, I was going to say if the other way around, that if Councillor Stripley was making the proposal, I would be very happy to second it. So I'll be happy to second what Councillor Stripley has actually said in her summary. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so we do have a move on the table to refer this decision back to Cabinet. I'm not going to take the vote on it immediately because I just want to throw my 5 eggs into this. Yeah, this is a very difficult decision, and it's obviously been given a lot of thought. And at the end of the day, it's down to a question of balance here, isn't it? Because on one hand, you've got most of the residents of Tatton Road wanted to stay closed. And on the other hand, a large number of people don't want it to be. But of course, I think if I were, I think most of us, if we were asked if we want our road closed off to traffic, we'd probably say yes, brilliant, thank you. As long as I can just drive my car up to my driveway, fantastic. And so, yeah, it's very difficult. But on the other hand, of course, you've got the wider population, you know, that want to drive up the road because it's there. That's what it's there for. But in this case, there was the consultation, and I don't think you can deny that the consultation was there. And overall, there was a large number of people against it. But of course, it's the impact that's different. The impact on the residents of Tatton Road is significant. The impact on a much larger group of people is probably less. So it's really a balanced decision. And it's for members now to decide whether that decision should be referred back to Cabinet. So I think we're going to go to the vote here. And so those that are for the motion to refer to Cabinet, would you indicate?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
9 for. Those against?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Okay, so that motion is carried. Thank you, members. Okay, so where are we now? I think we're at the end of our session. I'm not sure. We'll discuss that with the monitoring officer, I think. I'm just wondering, monitoring officer, is there anything else we need to do just to clarify the motion that we have? Because I see on my sheet here that reasons to be provided for any decision. Well, the reason is that we voted on it.
Chair, I think the committee would need to indicate when they refer the matter back to Cabinet the reason why they're referring it back to Cabinet, and that would have to be one of those points under the articles that.
Okay, members, please.
That this group believes was not followed.
Okay, so I think I understand that. So there, in your call-in note, you've actually said specifically, I think, in particular, we believe there has been an over-reliance on the opinion of the ward councillors, and undue weight has been given to those opinions over and above the wider consultation process. Is that basically the main reason? That would be, Councillor Haynes, would you agree with that? You would? Okay.
Yes, Chair.
In that case, monitoring officer, are you happy to accept that?
Yes, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so I think that brings us to the end of the agenda for this afternoon. So we've actually got time for some chips tonight, and we'll see you back here at 6 o'clock. Thank you.